Chapter 194. Thinking of this, Hellion Vivian ran her fingers across the thin calluses on her fingertips. Looking at Su Yanmo's slightly stiff face, she slowly smiled. No matter how much hatred Su Yanmo had in her heart, she could only force a gentle smile on her face and wait for this matter to pass quietly. Fortunately, the retired emperor had accepted her explanation. No matter how terrible the situation was now, her beloved daughter was still the genius that everyone supported and was most likely to become the third princess consort. She believed that the retired emperor would also consider this point. In the Dragon War Empire, it was useless no matter how smart one was. Only those who had extraordinary martial chi cultivation had the right to speak. That little bastard, sooner or later, he would pay the price for what he did today. She was not in a hurry. Su Yanmo lowered her eyes and fiddled with the prayer beads in her hand. She was led by the young monk to the most remote courtyard of the temple. Generally speaking, women were not allowed to stay in the temple, because they were worried that they would violate the temple's rules. However, the difference between the Hidden Spirit Temple and other temples was that because it was known as a royal temple, the people who came to offer incense and pray every year were basically the high-ranking members of the royal family. Among them, there were many women who would be in danger when they went down the mountain at night. Therefore, the temple set aside a courtyard to accommodate the women. However, this courtyard looked too desolate. The decorations inside were also very simple, just like a cold palace. The only good thing was that there was no smell in the room. But just this was enough to make Su Yanmo unbearable. Since young, she had always been the apple of everyone's eye. Even after she snatched Hellion Guangyao, she was still pampered and respected. Even in the circle of Sijio City, which one of those high officials and nobles did not rush to curry favor with her when they saw her. Now she was forced to live in a place that was worse than a woodshed. The hatred that Su Yanmo had just suppressed all gushed out in an instant. Hellion Jiaoer came with her mother. When she saw the house, she subconsciously covered her mouth and nose with a handkerchief. She reached out and pulled Su Yanmo's sleeve. "Mother, let's go find grandfather and ask him to go directly to the palace to hand over the memorial. How can anyone live in such a house?" "No, mother, you can't live here." "If I don't live here, then you have to." Madame Su glanced at her, then pulled her hand out and gently closed the wooden door. Only then did she reveal the viciousness in her eyes. "Your grandfather is now thinking of a way to get the military power in his hands. He must coax the emperor to come and not make any mistakes. If we let him submit a memorial for such a small matter, the retired emperor will not be happy." Hellion Jiaoer clenched her fists. "What should we do? Is mother really going to stay here for a month? Mother will find a way to get out of here in less than a month. You, on the other hand," Madame Su looked at her. There was a hint of coldness in her eyes. "How many times has mother said that no matter what happens, you have to suffer until the end in front of others? You can't easily reveal your true feelings. All these years you have been doing very well. Mother has never told you much, but today you almost made mother unable to clean up the mess." Hellion Jiaoer lowered her eyes and bit her red lips. "Mother, your daughter is wrong." As she spoke, she fiercely gritted her teeth. "It's just that little bitch is too hateful. Look at what she said. Not only was it directed at me, but it was also directed at you, mother. She put us in an awkward position in front of everyone. I won't let this matter go so easily. That little bitch has grown up to be what she is today. It is indeed unexpected." Su Yanmo reached out her hand and patted the back of Hellion Jiaoer's hand. "Don't worry, she won't be able to get any benefits with such a savage temperament. The martial chi test is coming soon. Your grandfather should have told you to focus on this. Jiaoer, you have to understand that in our Dragon War Empire, one's family background and martial chi are the most important. No matter how much that little bitch tosses around, she won't be able to make a splash. Now that she has been expelled from the family, it is impossible for her to participate in any big meetings, unless she really has some kind of innate ability. But as you can see in this time's test, she didn't even dare to touch martial chi. The armaments she made are indeed amazing, but as long as there is a day when she doesn't have martial chi, then the things she makes will not be recognized by the elders. Even if she is the only disciple of Grandmaster Zizun, she can only stare blankly at that pile of scrap metal. This is life. So Jiaoer, you don't have to dirty your hands for such a little bitch. When you stand out in the martial chi test, you won't even know where she went. Do you understand what I said? Helian Jiaoer nodded, her fingers clenched again. Mother, I understand what you said, but to let me suffer such a loss, I really can't take it lying down. If the people in the capital knew about this, who knows what they would say about me and Mother. So you have to win even more. Su Yanmo's gaze was long. Her tone was determined to win. Your father has already contacted the people of Profound Heaven. You just have to wait for the best armaments to go on stage. After so many days, Helian Jiaoer finally heard a piece of news that made people feel comfortable. She reached out and held Su Yanmo's arm. Her tone carried a hint of coquettishness. But I heard that recently, there is an unknown little beggar in the capital. He is so arrogant that every aristocratic family has been challenged by him once. If I meet him during the test, what should I do? You don't have to worry about this. Su Yanmo smiled faintly. Jiaoer, you have to remember, you have the gospel of the reincarnation of the Phoenix Girl. Even the elders of the 4 major families want to protect you. A little beggar, your grandfather will find a way to help you deal with it. When Helian Jiaoer thought about the reincarnation of the Phoenix Girl, there was no joy on her face. Instead, her eyes darkened and she muttered absent-mindedly. But that year, I was not the only one who was divined to be the reincarnation of the Phoenix Girl. Mother, didn't you see it too? At that time, the divine monk said that both I and that bitch could be the reincarnation. Jiao! Su Yanmo suddenly shouted sternly, her face carrying a never-before-seen seriousness. Don't talk about this in the future. Helian Jiaoer naturally knew that she had said something wrong. In an instant, her beautiful face turned pale and her eyes turned back and forth. Su Yanmo let out a long sigh and reached out to stroke her beloved daughter's long hair. Right now there is only the 2 of us, mother and daughter, so there is nothing to worry about. But who knows when the walls have ears? Jiaoer, remember, the divine monk said that the reincarnation of the Phoenix Girl is you. And it can only be you. Do you understand? I understand. Helian Jiaoer lowered her head and was silent for a long time. Su Yanmo looked at the bamboo forest outside the window, her narrowed eyes filled with unpredictable malice. It seemed that that little bastard could not be left alive. Chapter 195. Su Yanmo understood better than anyone that the reason why the Helian Jiaoer could receive so much protection was because of the rumor that she was the reincarnation of the Phoenix Girl. Although the War Dragon Empire was ruled by the royal family, there were many things that the royal family had to consider the feelings of the 4 great clans. This was a phenomenon that had existed since the founding of the War Dragon Empire, and no one could break it. But when the divine monk calculated that the Phoenix Girl was about to descend, the situation changed. The elders of the 4 great clans wanted to use the Phoenix Girl to rule the imperial court, so they let the divine monk continue to calculate where the Phoenix Girl would descend. The divine monk was unwilling. This kind of leaking of heaven's secrets was often exchanged with calamity. No one wanted to die. If the elders hadn't threatened him with the lives of many monks in the temple, the divine monk wouldn't have agreed to continue. Finally, after 3 days and 3 nights, the divine monk finally calculated where the Phoenix Girl would descend, but there were 2 children in that courtyard at that time. The divine monk wasn't sure which child was the Phoenix Girl, so Su Yanmo simply pushed her daughter out and locked up the little vile spawn, not letting her out again. Because of this calculation, the divine monk abruptly aged 10 years, no longer wanting to care about worldly affairs. But Su Yanmo was not at ease. The only person who knew the situation was this divine monk. Getting rid of him would mean that her daughter was the world's first and only Phoenix Girl. Thus, she sent out 3 waves of killers, finally forcing the divine monk to jump off the cliff. Now that old bald donkey should have turned into a pile of bones. But now that these 2 children were growing up, it would soon be time to determine who was the Phoenix Girl. Of course, Su Yanmo felt that only her beloved daughter would be the real Phoenix Girl reincarnation. But she couldn't prevent another kind of accident from happening. Because of this kind of framing incident, the retired emperor's mood didn't seem to be very good, so even his previous habits were cancelled. Everyone returned to their own rooms, preparing to rest. Of course, there were still people who didn't forget the main task. At this moment, Abbot Fengzhang was sitting in his meditation room, fiddling with the prayer beads in his hand. The atmosphere was a bit low. The little monk standing outside didn't even dare to enter. Sitting in front of him was Beligaju. His expression was cold and demonic with a hint of evil. That kind of evil aura could not be suppressed even in a Buddhist holy land. On the contrary, it was because of such an environment. It made him look even more handsome, like a demon or an immortal. Head Abbot Fangzhong tilted his head, his gaze looking into the man's eyes. Beligaju, on the other hand, raised his chin slightly, making his gaze appear elegant and indifferent. I know that every time you come to my place, you won't say anything, but… Abbot Fangzhang's white finger pointed outside the window. Someone is worried about you. Every year on the surface, he comes to pray for blessings, but in reality, he is most concerned about you. What do you want me to say? A faint voice resounded in the meditation room where only the two of them were present, bringing with it a gradually chilling coldness. Beligaju's slender fingers tapped the handle of the wooden chair. His body leaned back, his long legs crossed. His gaze looked straight at Head Abbot Fangzhong. The corners of his lips curved up, making people think of a series of negative words, such as arrogance, ridicule, indifference. Head Abbot Fangzhong closed his eyes and sighed, using his fingers to massage his own temples. He dared to bet that this day's bathing, praying to Buddha, meditating and chanting scriptures would all be wasted, because the person he wanted to cure had absolutely no intention of talking to him at all. These past few years, retired emperor would be like this every year, asking him to counsel the third prince. However, Beligaju was a pool of stagnant water, a gorgeous pool of stagnant water. When he was smiling yet not smiling, that was the time when he had the most offensive power. When he raised his eyes, it was as if he could instantly pry into other people's inner world. Making him chat with this kind of person really made his heart tired. For example, what kind of mood changes have you had recently? Head Abbot Fangzhong was really helpless. You are very clear that you are like a martial cultivator who can explode at any time. You should have recently recovered your martial qi. Don't tell me you don't have anything you want to do? Bailey Jiaju smiled. That kind of smile was like a red spider lily that bloomed on the road to hell. It was in full swing. Does killing count? Head Abbot Fangzhong almost spat out the tea he drank. This had to be written down, because this stinking brat could very well be telling the truth. What the retired emperor was most afraid of was that, apart from killing people, he would not be able to find any other pleasure. Beligaju leaned back and said in a calm and indifferent voice, "You seem to be very excited. Besides killing people, don't you have anything else you want to do?" Head Abbot Fangzhong thought of the main question he wanted to ask this time. For example, you aren't young anymore, right? Have you ever thought of looking for a wonderful marriage? This old monk heard from your imperial grandfather that you chose the eldest daughter of the Hellion family. And looking at her today, I can see that she's actually intelligent. However, haven't you always liked white, clean, and easy to bully little white rabbits? How come your preferences have changed? Head Abbot Fangzhong actually really wanted to directly ask, "Are you thinking of using him?" Beligaju's mouth slowly draws a curve. Abbot Fangzhang's scalp goes numb from his smile. Only then did he say in a monotonous voice, "What does good prey have to do with what they look like?" Prey? Head Abbot Fangzhang's face was full of question marks. But this was a good sign. It really was a good sign. In the past, when they sat together, if he didn't speak, then he would speak venomously. Answering one of his questions so normally like today was really too rare. Head Abbot Fangzhong wrote at a high speed, almost moved to tears. Obtaining a bit of information about this stinking brat's thoughts was really too difficult. Today this lord's mood is good. I can chat with you a bit more. Beligaju propped up his chin with his fingertips, his whole body emitting a condescending arrogance. Head Abbot Fangzhong was startled, then he raised his eyes, a bit not daring to believe what he heard. Wait a minute, third prince, this person's words should be heard in reverse. Beligaju's mouth hung a smiling expression. His tone was light. If he wanted to, he could practically make the listener feel as if they were bathed in a spring breeze. If this lord says this lord has always wanted to obtain a person, but until now, I still haven't obtained it, what kind of suggestion would the abbot give this lord? Is there anyone in this world that you can't obtain? Head Abbot Fangzhong was shaken. That person must have a very strong willpower to be able to refuse this kind of face that swallows both men and women. Beligaju also seemed to be quite vexed. But the words he said didn't have the slightest bit of emotion. That's why this lord is thinking whether or not to remove her claws and directly tie her up. Head Abbot Feng Zhang. Chapter 196. In the end, did he fancy a person or a pet, and even tie her up? It'd be strange if the other party was willing. Head Abbot Feng Zhang pretended to be serious and coughed twice. It's best if you don't do that. Beligaju slanted his face and looked at Head Abbot Feng Zhang with half-opened eyes. That expression seemed to be asking why. Head Abbot Feng Zhang put down the brush in his hand. First of all, what you fancy is a person, right? Everyone has emotions. Let's put it this way, if someone tied you up, what would you do? You definitely wouldn't be happy. This lord won't be unhappy. As long as those people are killed, it's fine. Why would I be unhappy? Beligaju leisurely sipped a mouthful of tea and curved his lips into a half-smile, as if he was talking about a matter that wasn't a big deal. Head Abbot Feng Zhang really wanted to grab him by the collar and roar. Do you think everyone in the world is as abnormal as you? However, what you said is right, I can't tie her up. Beligaju wrinkled his long eyebrows, as if he had a headache over this issue. Head Abbot Feng Zhang was flabbergasted. Just as he was wondering why this stinking brat suddenly became enlightened, he heard him say again, "It's a bit of a pity to break those pair of claws like this. As long as she peacefully stays by this lord's side, this lord doesn't have to tie her up." Cough, that's the reasoning, right? Head Abbot Feng Zhang felt like he was about to be brainwashed. He actually had nothing to say in response to this stinking brat's words. Beligaju glanced at him. The curve of his neck was graceful and perfect, but his tone suddenly became cold. It's a pity that she doesn't know how to live peacefully. Beligaju said the last sentence very heavily. His voice was full of texture, yet it didn't have a trace of warmth. It echoed in the empty room, and one only felt like the surrounding air was sucked away by him. Head Abbot Feng Zhang suddenly felt cold all over his body. Then what do you plan to do? Lock her up. Beligaju changed his sitting position, graceful as before. After a few more days, she can completely belong to this lord. Hearing this, Head Abbot Feng Zhang opened his eyes wide in shock. You're talking about that eldest miss of the Hellion family? Beligaju faintly hummed in response. Head Abbot Feng Zhang's coughing became even more severe. Mommy, are you choosing a consort? This is simply tormenting people. How in the world did that Hellion family's eldest daughter provoke this king of hell, making him mess with her like this? I don't think that's a good idea. Abbot Feng Zhang drank a mouthful of tea and probingly said, that girl's engagement was broken off before. She's already pitiful enough, and now she's being locked up by you. How did she offend you that you have to be like this? Beligaju's fingers stiffened and his thin lips moved. His voice was so soft that it was as if he had never spoken before. She doesn't have me in her eyes. What? Head Abbot Feng Zhang didn't hear clearly. He pricked up his ears and said, if you don't want to say it, then forget it. It's really a sin, a sin. Saying this, Head Abbot Feng Zhang put his palms together and chanted, Amit Ba Buddha. Beligaju, however, laughed. The corners of his mouth curled into a devilish smile. Sin. I've already said that I've had enough. The things I want, if people block, I'll kill them. Buddha, I'll kill Buddha. Do I still lack this one time? If you want to blame someone, blame her for provoking me. After provoking me, she wants to retreat. How could there be such a good thing in this world? You want to destroy her? Head Abbot Feng Zhang's voice also trembled. He didn't know if it was his misperception, but at this moment, he unexpectedly saw a demonic nature on Beligaju's body. Only that kind of demonic nature was too perfect. It was like a god standing in the darkness, falling into the chaos of the ninth heaven. It was so demonic that it made people fascinated and timid. Beligaju laughed, endlessly bewitching. No, why would I want to destroy her? This prey that makes my entire body heat up when I hear her name. I only want to press her under my body and fiercely have her. Saying the last two words, Beligaju curved his thin lips. That ascetic face carried a sensual flavor that could practically bewitch all men and women. You're joking, right? Head Abbot Feng Zhang suddenly jumped up. He finally realized that something wasn't right. This was clearly the symptoms of a little boy's first awakening of love, right? But first awakening of love? Head Abbot Feng Zhang glanced at Beligaju again. These 4 words really weren't suitable for the royal family. Moreover, what kind of awakening of love would open so viciously? What binding locking that was really enough. Baligaju raised his eyebrows again. But she doesn't seem to want me to do that. You have to treat women a bit more gently. After head abbot Fengzhang finished speaking, he felt very helpless. Why did he, a monk, have to discuss this kind of issue with a prince in a temple? Did this stinky brat not have a maid to accompany him to his bed? Were all the hidden guards in the palace all dead? They didn't know to find a woman for his master to properly learn. However, he had always thought that this stinky brat didn't have this kind of requirement. After all, he'd heard that the number of women he'd thrown out of the palace along with their blankets, if there weren't 10, there were at least 9. Every single one was treated like garbage and disposed of. After the retired emperor used this kind of method to send people to the stinky brat's side a few times, he didn't send any more. Because he was afraid that in the future, if this were to spread out, there would be people saying that the 3rd prince couldn't have sex. Head abbot Fengzhang let out a long sigh. He'd also seen the way this stinky brat treated women. He was courteous, but he was a bit too indifferent and heartless. He simply had no desires and no demands, even more plain than him, a monk. Now that he thought about it, what no desires and no demands, it was all nonsense. Head abbot Fengzhang held his forehead and started to have a headache thinking whether this was a good thing or a bad thing. The good thing was that this stinky brat finally had some human feelings. The bad thing wasn't his desire to monopolize a bit too strong? Moreover, he was only treating Hellion Vivian as prey. This has nothing to do with being gentle or not. She will resist this highness. Baligaju absent-mindedly interrupted head abbot Fengzhang's contemplation, the light in his eyes deep and long. You've already tried? Head abbot Fengzhang's eyes widened into round black grapes. This stinky brat shouldn't have taken advantage of this trip to do something to her, right? Baligaju lazily raised his eyes. What does this have to do with you? No, this old monk is helping you analyze the situation. Head abbot Fengzhang had a straight face. Baligaju indifferently stood up. No need. Head abbot Fengzhang. How can you talk halfway? This will make people feel stifled to death, okay? Perhaps she's resisting you because she has someone else in her heart? Head abbot Fengzhang really thought this way. After all, women would usually keep their chastity for the sake of that cinnabar mole in their heart. In addition, Hellion Vivian had just had her marriage annulled. She still hadn't forgotten Murong Changfeng and so on. These were all possibilities. Chapter 197. Having heard what was said, Bailey Jiaju's leaving footsteps paused. His eyes that were as dark as the night completely opened. That kind of indifferent feeling accompanied by a smile that was not a smile gradually disappeared from the corners of his mouth. He was currently frowning as if pondering something. When his black hair fell down, it just happened to cover that pair of cold eyes. Demonic coldness and hostility simultaneously spread out from the corners of his eyes. There was also a kind of indescribable emotion, like a sharp thorn that could pierce a person's heart. Abbot Fengzhang was thinking, that girl who became the object of that stinky brat's imagination is really pitiful. He didn't know that in the instant the wooden door closed, Baligaju's hands hidden under his long sleeves clenched bit by bit. A ruthless aura lingered around him, the aura becoming stronger and stronger. The bluestone path under his feet was affected by his ruthless aura, continuously releasing kacha sounds, as if it would fall apart in the next moment. He walked step by step into the boundless night. In the long wind, the surname Tang continuously poured into his ears. Following that, he turned around, slowly walking towards the courtyard wing that he originally shouldn't have gone to. It was night, the rain had just stopped. The early summer wind blew through the bamboo forest. Hitting one's face would always make one feel indescribably comfortable. Hellion Vivian raised her head as she sat in the wooden tub that was half a person's height, feeling the comfortable gentleness of the water. Normally, Hellion Vivian would let Yuan Ming stay in the Xuanhuan space. As for Little White, it was still in the midst of the heavenly tribulation, so Hellion Vivian might as well let it sleep. Once this period of time passed, she would wake it up. That way, when it came out, it wouldn't be struck by lightning. She was the only one in the room. Probably because it was on the mountain, the air was much better at night. The green bamboo forest rustled. The tranquility was long, making Hellion Vivian forget that in order to obtain the incense wood, she had knelt down on the 199 steps and received a light injury. That injury wasn't big to begin with, it was just a bit inconvenient to soak in the bath. The injury was on her knee, so when soaking in the water she would feel a bit of pain. Hellion Vivian didn't mind. In the past, when she was on a mission, her injuries were much more serious than this. After a bath, she would just apply something casually. It was too humid on the mountain, and ancient clothes were cumbersome. If it was somewhere else, Hellion Vivian could just wear a pair of slim-fit sports shorts. This kind of wound could be cured after a day of drying. Hellion Vivian thought as she yawned, holding a glass of sake in her hand. When she was in modern times, her favorite thing to do was to nestle in her 1-meter-wide double bathtub, drinking red wine while taking orders. Sometimes, she would even read novels on her tablet. Even in ancient times, this habit still couldn't be changed. However, there was no hope of reading novels on a tablet. Fortunately, the scenery was peaceful. Hellion Vivian reached out her hand and was about to put down the wine glass in her palm when she heard a creak. The wooden door that she had locked opened. Hellion Vivian was stunned. Her gaze landed on the several green bamboos beside the moon gate swaying gently under the moonlight. The man was standing in the moonlight. He was wearing a flowing cloud-patterned wide-sleeved brocade robe. On the snow-white undershirt, there were vivid and lifelike bamboos, as if they were soaked in ink. His long black hair was tied up and scattered on his broad back, making him look like an ancient god. "Your Highness." Behind that man, there seemed to be Shadow's anxious voice. After all, this was Hidden Spirit Temple. The womenfolk and the men lived separately. Like Bailey Jiaju, breaking into the courtyard on the side was already breaking the rules. Aning was only glad that it was already late and most of the people who were sleeping were already asleep. As for the remaining few, he had the ability to deal with them. Otherwise, if they followed His Highness's actions, they would be invited by the Emperor Emeritus for tea tomorrow. Baligaju acted as if he didn't hear anything. He waved his wide sleeves and that wooden door seemed to have sensed something and closed again, not leaving a single gap. He stood by the wooden tub and looked at her condescendingly. After a while he said, "You want to talk to this Highness about what's going to happen next without wearing anything?" Hellion Vivian just remembered that although this tub of hot water was deep and had been sprinkled with rose petals, it wasn't that it wasn't clear. In an instant red clouds spread from her cheeks. Hellion Vivian picked up the towel beside her and didn't forget to remind Baligaju, "I'll have to trouble your Highness to turn around." Bailey Jiaju looked at that patch of red, as if there were wild weeds growing wildly in his heart, slightly itching. He tightly clasped his fingers, within his ink-black eyes flashed an unknown light, once again unhurriedly sized up Wei for a while, only then did he quite reservedly turn around. Hellion Vivian quickly wrapped that long towel around her body and firmly tied a knot. There were no clothes on the side, so if she wanted to wear clothes she had to pass by the man and go to the other side. Hellion Vivian thought about it and didn't think there was anything wrong. Since she was wrapped in a towel, she might as well just walk barefoot on the wooden floor. When she passed by Baligaju, she glanced at his face. His thick eyelashes were slightly closed and there was a strong aura of self-restraint. It seemed that a certain Highness didn't have any intention of looking at her, so she could be at ease and boldly go get her clothes. But what she didn't expect was that as soon as she walked over, Baligaju's body moved. It was probably because his eyes were closed, and he didn't know which direction she would come from. Moving aside like this, she directly bumped into his arms. The incomparably fresh sandalwood scent instantly entered her nose. It smelled good and noble, very typical. Hellion Wei frowned as she watched him slowly open his pair of eyes. Those were a pair of eyes that carried a sense of inquiry, and the shape of those eyes carried a bit of playfulness and mockery. Even so, it didn't conceal the intellectual and aloof temperament that he revealed. "Are you doing this on purpose?" Deliberately bumping into this Highness's arms. "Your Highness, you're really thinking too much." Hellion Vivian laughed evilly and wanted to push him away. Helplessly, the strip of cloth that was tied with the towel fell into the other's palm. That pair of very slender hands in White Academy were holding Taoist scriptures and scrolls. Outside of White Academy, they were holding the universe under the heavens. It was so beautiful that it easily made people think of the white porcelain antiques displayed in museums. This kind of hand was very suitable for holding goblets, but it was more suitable for killing people. But right now, his hand was holding the strip of cloth that she used to tie the towel. This made Hellion Vivian feel that everything was so abnormal. "Your Highness, don't you think you should let go of your hand?" Hellion Vivian smiled and crossed her arms. "I don't think that your Highness came here in the middle of the night just to play with the strip of cloth on my towel." Beligaju made a sound of N and slowly approached her. With one hand behind her back, the light in his eyes pressed down. Chapter 198. Standing in Hellion Vivian's position, she could only see half of his neck and his smooth jawline. If she got closer, she could see his light-colored thin lips, which looked quite ascetic and sexy. This kind of man was not only invincible among women, but he would also be popular among men. However, she was the ace agent of the 21st century, and it seemed a bit unreasonable for her to be pressed against the wall like this. "Your Highness, I have a bad temper." Hellion Vivian followed his posture and reached out to grab his collar. Her action was cool and she didn't retreat at all. Her thin lips smiled. "So, some jokes are better not made." Beligaju looked at her action and smiled playfully. That mocking look seemed to be saying, "What are you thinking? Do you think this Highness will touch you?" Hellion Vivian shrugged. Some words should be said in advance to be safe. Who knows what this third prince is thinking? Bailey Jiaju slowly straightened his body. With an indescribable coldness, he pushed the person away. He leisurely reached out his hand to adjust his collar. His actions were very stylish as he commanded, "You can go and put on your clothes." Hellion Vivian didn't relax because of this sentence. Looking at the boudoir that was only covered by an ancient painting, she raised her eyebrows. "Your Highness, you don't want to go out? This Highness is right here. You can change." Beligaju casually lay down on the wooden bed. His movements were languid and his expression was indifferent, as if he was the master of this room. Hellion Vivian. How could she change here? And she hadn't slept on that bed herself. Wasn't this a bit too overbearing? Hellion Vivian looked up at the night sky outside. Wasting time would only be a waste of time. Anyway, it was just changing clothes and there was a screen between them. It wasn't a big deal. Moreover, when they really fulfilled the contract, even if they didn't have sex, they would have to sleep in the same room. Getting used to being alone in advance would be helpful for living together in the future. Hellion Vivian had a nimble personality. In the end, she glanced at Beligaju before taking the clothes and walking to the other side of the ancient painting. She first put the clothes in her hand on the wooden rack on the side of the painting, then slowly began to unwrap the towel wrapped around her body. What Hellion Vivian didn't know was that such an ancient painting actually didn't have much of an effect. It even made her movements of putting on clothes more clear. Her exquisite curves were reflected on the painting. Just as Hellion Vivian turned sideways to take the outer garment, she felt as if there was a gaze sliding over her body inch by inch, which made her inexplicably hot. Wei Wei furrowed her eyebrows. Was it an illusion? How could she have this kind of illusion? She shook her head. She didn't think that the third prince would be interested in her. Because when she came out, the man's face was as cold as always. If it wasn't for that silver mask softening his expression a bit, people would feel that he was even more unapproachable. Moreover, his eyes were closed. Hellion Vivian used the towel to dry her long hair. She lazily sat on the wooden chair opposite the bed and was about to speak. Just as she was about to speak, she heard Beligaju's indifferent voice say, "Come here." Hellion Vivian didn't refuse his words. Because there was no point in refusing. They still had a long time to work together. Only, what she didn't expect was that as soon as she approached, Beligaju suddenly pulled her over. His slightly cold fingers pressed down on her knees. His voice was cold. What happened? Hellion Vivian was stunned. She didn't think that the third prince would care about her injuries, although the way he cared was a bit strange. When I was asking for the incense wood, I knelt down too many times. It's abraded. Hellion Vivian didn't want to have such delicate skin, but this body really hadn't suffered much in the past. When she kowtowed to the 80th step, she felt the burning sensation on her knees. At that time she was pressed for time, so she didn't pay much attention to it. Now it seemed that this injury was a bit ugly. No wonder even the third prince frowned in disdain. Beligaju didn't say anything. He pushed her away again, stood up and opened the door. When he came in again, he was holding a box of things that Hellion Vivian had never seen before. But from the smell it was definitely something good. It was light and cool, and it even had a pleasant smell of plants. Hellion Vivian's nose twitched. Before she could open her mouth to ask, she felt an extremely comfortable force on her knees. Hellion Vivian's fingers stiffened. She looked down at the bottom of her feet. That pair of eyes was still indifferent without any warmth. His slender fingertips brushed past her legs. It was very cold. Because she was injured in the knee, when he cleaned the wound, he had to lower himself than she was sitting. Hellion Vivian saw that even though the other person was looking up, he was still able to achieve the effect of a monarch's aura. She couldn't help but kick her own calf. It was a complete knee-jerk reflex. She almost kicked off that silver mask, but the man grabbed her ankle. Her ankle was very thin. It was white and smooth as if it would break with a snap. Probably because it was too thin, Beligaju's hand was more than enough to hold it. The man raised his eyebrows. His tone was cold. Did you do it on purpose? Hellion Vivian looked up at the sky. No. You seem to be very regretful that you didn't kick this prince's face. When Beligaju's voice was cold, it was really easy to think of a decision-making president sitting in the office. Hellion Vivian cleverly changed the topic. What did you apply on me? Tianshan Snow Lotus. With the royal's temperament, one couldn't expect him to say more than one word when answering a question. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Tianshan Snow Lotus? Shouldn't natural snow lotuses be taken orally? It's just a pill. You can use it however you want. Beligaju gave her something on one side and signaled her to hold it by herself. Then he went to apply the other side. His every move was full of the elegance of a Shangxian. Wei Wei was a bit restless. Snow lotus in the sky, it said that if one ate one, it could boost one's martial chi for 3 years. Quite a few martial artists, in order to be able to obtain it, waited for years at the foot of Great White Mountain, precisely for the sake of waiting for it to bloom once every 10 years. Furthermore, this thing often grew on the precipitous cliffs and precipitous walls, and wasn't that easy to pick. That's why, within the capital, those shops that sold sacred medicines, the price of Tianshan Snow Lotus had always been the most expensive among the most expensive. Not many people were willing to buy it. Even if the Defense Division's residents wanted this thing, they still had to weigh their own expenses. However, Third Prince unexpectedly used it as the most common medicinal paste. The world of capitalists was really not something that human beings could understand. Hellion Vivian finally realized that she was really marrying a tall, rich, and handsome man and had reached the peak of life. Chapter 199. Your Highness, it's the middle of the night. Shadow, who was standing outside, softly reminded him. He raised his head and looked at the eastern sky. The masters of Hidden Spirit Temple all woke up early. If they found out that a prince entered a side room in the middle of the night, who knows what the consequences would be? It's very possible that the reputation of the eldest daughter of the Hellion family would be completely ruined. Beligaju naturally knew this. Originally, it was so late today he shouldn't have come to this place. Wrinkling his long eyebrows, Beligaju lazily made an N sound and withdrew his hand. He faced Hellion Vivian and said indifferently, "Tomorrow you go find Eunuch Sunday. He will arrange a new carriage for you." Not too good. Hellion Vivian's eyes flashed and her thin lips carried a smile. Being taken care of too much is easy to attract jealousy. Beligaju raised his eyes and glanced at her. His voice didn't have the slightest fluctuation. Eunuch's son will find a good excuse. Okay then. In any case, Hellion Vivian also wanted to stay in the carriage, a bit more comfortably. Since she didn't need to worry about anything else, there was no reason to refuse to enjoy. Thinking of this, Hellion Vivian lazily yawned again and instructed Beligaju, "When you go out, help me close the door. There are many mosquitoes in the bamboo forest." Was this woman ordering His Highness? Shadow listened to the words in the room and silently looked at the sky. When he came back to his senses, Beligaju had already walked out. "Your Highness." Shadow hesitated for a moment. In the end, he didn't report the recent information to his master. He thought to wait and see. Maybe it was a trap. After all, Miss Yoon was different from other women. Even Shadow didn't understand why His Highness would choose this young lady of the Hellion family. Could it be that he wanted to divert the attention of the 4 great clans? If it was like this, then it made sense. Only, that young lady of the Hellion family was pitiful. She probably didn't know anything. Shadow looked behind him again and raised his feet to follow Beligaju. The next day, the weather was fine and the breeze was gentle. The opening meal was still vegetarian dishes. The vegetable leaves were all from the back of the temple. They were picked and eaten immediately. After a few stir-frying, the aroma would fill the air. It was obvious that the retired emperor was in a good mood today. After breakfast, he didn't ask the students to accompany him. Instead, he went to the backyard of the temple to fulfill his vow. Other than praying for blessings, the most efficacious thing in the hidden spirit temple was praying for marriage. Now that they were already here, there weren't many noble ladies who weren't tempted. However, it wasn't convenient for them to say so directly, so they could only be led by a servant girl, saying that they were going to burn incense. Hellion Vivian didn't want to get involved in this kind of thing. Taking advantage of the fact that there weren't many people around, she grabbed Hei's sleeve. Hei's found it strange. "Yo, you actually took the initiative to look for me. Put away that creepy tone of yours." Hellion Vivian opened her palm, revealing a string of white Buddhist prayer beads. If a woman wore it, she would definitely look beautiful. "You asked me to ask for it." Hei's eyes lit up. "You really did ask for it. Did you think that all your kowtowing was in vain?" Hellion Vivian smiled faintly and looked at his appearance. "What? You want to give it to that childhood sweetheart of yours to ensure her safety?" Hei's face turned cold. "Who would give it to that ungrateful thing? I took it myself to play with." "Take a string of female Buddhist prayer beads and play with it." Hellion Vivian laughed. Young Master Hei really has a special taste. Hei's didn't get angry and put away the Buddhist prayer beads. "It's better than someone offending the 3rd prince who shouldn't be offended." Hellion Vivian stretched her waist, as if she didn't hear what he said. Hei's voice was very light, but it carried a hint of warning. "Don't let yourself fall into it. The 3rd prince approached you. This matter isn't that simple." Hellion Vivian wrinkled her eyebrows. The more she listened, the more she felt that Hei's words were implying something. "Young Master Hei, why are you still here?" Eunuch Sun spat at a servant girl and raised his whisk. "The retired emperor is looking for you everywhere." Hei's turned his head and glanced at Eunuch Sunday. He said to Hellion Vivian, "Then I'll leave first. You take care of yourself." Hellion Vivian faintly made a sound of N. Eunuch Sun, however, took another look at this side. After thinking for a bit, he still walked over and said with a smile, "This servant heard that eldest Mrs. Ni was injured. It's time to find a comfortable carriage. This servant has already arranged it. When the retired emperor comes out, a little eunuch will lead eldest Miss there. Eldest Miss doesn't need to worry about anything else." "Thank you for your trouble, Eunuch Sunday," Hellion Vivian said sincerely. She had always treated people this way. She wouldn't treat them differently because of their status. This is what this old servant should do. Eunuch Sun smiled. In the past, he didn't have much thoughts about this young miss from the defense division. He was a eunuch and had seen too many things in the old residence. He also understood why her reputation fell to this point. Even the Murong family wasn't willing to marry her. In general, it was because she didn't have power. A good-for-nothing was a good-for-nothing. She didn't know how to judge the situation and was too naive, so she fell into other people's trap. He didn't understand why his master would choose her. After yesterday's matter, Eunuch Sun really liked Hellion Vivian a little. She was neither servile nor overbearing. She didn't pressure people, but she also didn't shrink back. If His Highness didn't say it, he wouldn't know that the relationship between these two people had already reached this level. If it was someone else, they would have already become spoiled and act like a tyrant. However, along the way, Hellion Vivian didn't deliberately take advantage of His Highness. On the contrary, she was the easiest to serve. Those noble young ladies were also young. They were used to being pampered by their parents at home. When they went out, it was natural for them to order this and that. Obviously, those who could enter the hidden spirit temple weren't too many people. Each young lady and young master could only bring a servant with them. There were many things that they wouldn't show in front of the retired emperor. However, it was different in private. Those few disciples of his were ordered around until they didn't even have the strength to speak. It wasn't that the food wasn't good, it was that the place they lived in was simple and crude. There were even some people who wanted to eat pastries and insisted that the master in the temple make another plate for them. Eunuch's son had had enough. He just waited until they went down the mountain and found an opportunity to beat their parents. It was probably because he had encountered this kind of thing too many times that Eunuch's son found Hellion Vivian pleasing to the eye. It wasn't that those noble young ladies didn't have a good heart, it was just that it was very tiring. Hellion Vivian was a little different. She spoke very little and generally didn't take the initiative to talk to anyone. It seemed like she was either looking at the scenery or sleeping. However, as long as she opened her mouth, no matter who it was, she was very polite. This kind of politeness was different from the kind of politeness that Eunuch's son had seen before. It wasn't that there weren't ministers fawning over him. It was just that Eunuch's son also knew that those people would turn around and call him a dog servant. However, the feeling that Hellion Vivian gave him was different. How to say it, it was as if he was just like her. He was also a person, not a dog servant. With this kind of temperament, he would definitely be popular in the palace. Eunuch's son was secretly convinced. His Highness had indeed chosen the right person to enter the palace. Chapter 200. Hellion Vivian smiled. When she looked at Eunuch's son, there was a light in her eyes. There's one thing, but I don't know if I should say it or not. Eldest miss, there's no harm in speaking. Eunuch's son was indeed a shrewd person, but his shrewdness made people feel comfortable. Hellion Vivian turned the leaf in her hand, her voice indifferent. Eunuch's son's subordinate eunuchs are actually very smart, quite good at arranging things. Eunuch's son didn't think that this sentence was praising them. After staying by his Highness' side for a long time, Eunuch's son also learned to listen. His heart thumped. Eldest miss, what matter are you referring to? When we came to the Hidden Spirit Temple, my carriage was old and had been tampered with. That's why I got on Miss Chin's carriage. After Hellion Vivian finished speaking, she added another sentence. The broken tree on the mountain was cut very neatly. It wasn't an accident, it should have been broken by internal energy. When Eunuch's son heard this, he knew what was going on. Retired Emperor put him in charge of this trip to the Hidden Spirit Temple. It could be said that all big and small matters passed through his hands. How could there be a problem with the carriage? Clearly, there was someone who received benefits, which led to the following matters. In a moment, he had to quickly investigate which little bastard under his command had taken something he shouldn't have. It was better to kick him out of the palace as soon as possible, so as to avoid future troubles. Thinking of this, Eunuch's son raised his eyes again and hesitantly said, "These matters, why didn't eldest miss mention it yesterday? Eunuch's son is a member of the royal family, and on the way you didn't step on me. What shouldn't be said I won't say." Hellion Vivian only said a few words. This made Eunuch's son's heart tremble. As intelligent as he was, how could he not understand that eldest Miss Hellion was taking care of his face? She left him a way out. Otherwise, if yesterday's matter was completely revealed, even if he didn't know, he would still have to suffer a few beatings. Retired Emperor's biggest taboo was forming cliques for personal gain. He admitted that he was a bit greedy, but he never thought of betraying his master, and also didn't think about which family he belonged to. It seemed that it was time to change the group of eunuchs under his command. In the future, the situation in the palace would only become more and more severe. It would not be good for His Highness to keep people who were not absolutely loyal. Eunuch's son lowered his eyes and bowed. He sincerely said, "This old servant thanks eldest Mississippi." Hellion Vivian smiled. She didn't feel that she had done something very touching. Her style of doing things was indeed very ruthless, but that was towards those who provoked her. For those who didn't provoke her, she would always leave a way out for them. Moreover, the other party was an old man who didn't know anything. There was no need to implicate the innocent. However, Eunuch's son was smart because he knew what his role was. When Hellion Vivian told him about this, his first reaction was to inform the Emperor Emeritus. The retired emperor's hand that was holding the Buddhist scripture sank. He sneered. "It seems that these people really think that I'm old and muddle-headed." Eunuch's son lowered his eyes. "It is this old servant's fault." "What does this have to do with you?" Get up. The Emperor Emeritus folded his sleeves and laughed. However, that girl is indeed affectionate and righteous. She also has a sense of propriety. In the future, if she is by Aju's side, this emperor will be able to leave with peace of mind. Eunuch Sun opened his mouth. He didn't know how to use this topic. He understood His Highness' temperament. He would rather kill 1,000 by mistake than let go of one person. There was no other way. His natural disposition was so cold. He was elegant and proper, but his methods were too ruthless. Just like what the Emperor Emeritus said, he also hoped that there was such a person who could prevent His Highness from creating too many evil creatures after ascending the throne. Let them all come in. The Emperor Emeritus drank the medicine in his hand and put down the Buddhist scripture. His tone was indifferent as he ordered. At this time, Hei's had already arrived. The white Buddhist prayer beads hanging on his hand had not been completely put away. It was seen by his sharp-eyed schoolmate. Isn't this the Bodhi seed from the Hidden Spirit Temple? How did Master Hei's get it? That person looked at the white beads in Hei's hand enviously. He wanted to reach out and touch it. Hei's faintly glanced at him. That kind of coldness made that person's movements stiffen. Another young master held a paper fan and lightly waved it. He smiled and said, "Brotherly, I think you're really looking for a beating. That Bodhi seed was given to Master Hei by someone. When we just arrived, didn't you see Master Hei being held back by someone?" Held back by someone? By who? That person doubtfully raised his eyebrows. The young master with the fan chuckled. Who else could it be? It's that young lady from the Hellion family. This Bodhi seed is not easy to get. If you want a bunch, you have to kowtow several dozen times. It's still Master Hei who is charming and makes people admire him so much. A crisp sound rang out. Before he could finish speaking, that young master with the fan was frightened to the point of quivering. The little eunuch serving him almost knelt on the ground. He never thought that he, a royal family member, would unexpectedly spit on the ground when he handed over a cup of tea. Could it be that he didn't hold it steadily just now? That can't be. He even deliberately held it with both hands. Not only did the little eunuch think so much, he frantically wanted to use his sleeve to wipe the tea from Beligaju's hand. However, he was frozen in place by that ice-like gaze. Only what made him puzzled was that the royal family, who had always loved cleanliness, unexpectedly didn't immediately pull out the white handkerchief himself. Instead, he maintained his forward posture. It was unknown what he was thinking, but that expression even seemed a bit absent-minded. When Eunuch Sun just came out, he saw this kind of scene. Distressed, he cried out, "Did you get scalded anywhere? Hurry up and scoop some ice for His Highness." Yes, yes. Only then did the little eunuch come back to his senses and hurriedly left. A series of people and horses flipped upside down. Beligaju's gaze never concentrated. Only when it fell on Hei's wrist did it become exceptionally deep and eye-catching. No need. He leisurely brushed off the water droplets on his fingertips, leaving behind a string of obvious red marks on the back of his hand. Hei's raised his eyebrows in his direction. Beligaju didn't even look at him. When he brushed past him, it was an extremely cold temperature. There was no emotion, only a bone-piercing cold. Eunuch Sun anxiously followed behind his master, holding the burn ointment in his hand. He already couldn't remember how long it had been since His Highness was injured. It seemed that after that palace fire, he hadn't seen any scars on His Highness's body. How could he be scalded by a cup of hot tea today? Eunuch Sun regretted that he didn't stand by Beligaju's side to serve him. The young masters didn't take this matter to heart, because they saw that the third prince's expression didn't have a trace of unhappiness. Instead, the curve of his thin lips was deeper than usual. They just thought that Eunuch Sun was making a fuss over nothing. But the retired emperor was the retired emperor after all. That was his grandson. Even though it was hard to see through him since he was young, he still knew his temper. He's not happy. Chapter 201. The young masters continued to talk about what they were talking about before. Someone asked Brother Hei, "How did you get to know that Hellion family's young lady? Before, she was clearly only interested in the air. How come now she even knows what you like to eat and what you want so clearly?" Heizei smiled, the corners of his mouth curved. "What does this have to do with you guys? Do what you should do. Don't touch that pearl of mine, understand? Understood, we understand very well. The two of them looked at each other and smiled. At this time, Eunuch's son had already changed the teacup and wanted to bring it to his master. Only then did he discover that his palm was tightly holding the remaining brittle pieces, which had already overflowed with many beads of blood. Eunuch's son subconsciously cried out in alarm. He saw that Baligaju seemed to be tired of it. He slightly lifted his sleeve and unhurriedly wiped the dirt from his palm. He casually threw the white handkerchief to the side, and also didn't go to that cup of tea in Eunuch's son's hand. His expression was indifferent, as if the injured person wasn't him. Eunuch's son also didn't dare to say anything and put that teacup to the side. Listening to the young masters chatting and laughing, his whole body felt uncomfortable. It wasn't because of anything else, but because from the beginning, that smile on the corners of His Highness's mouth hadn't fallen. Let's go to the front hall and take a look. Retired Emperor's face carried a wise smile as he turned his head and said, presumably, you guys also want to know what those girls are wishing for. Many of the young masters from influential families blushed. After all, no matter how mature they were still teenagers. It was impossible to say that they didn't have a girl they liked in their hearts. As they walked, the bamboo forest swayed and a cool breeze blew. They didn't feel the slightest bit hot and were very leisurely and comfortable. Hellion Vivian didn't go in with Hellion Jiaoer and the others to pray for fortune, but she also couldn't delay the journey. She simply sat under the locust tree at the entrance of the hall. Her body was half leaning, and the softest snow petals in the forest swayed. Occasionally, 2 pieces fell on the back of her hand. The scene was extremely beautiful. When the young masters walked over, they saw this scene. Their footsteps paused as they were somewhat stunned. Seeing this situation, Hei's was afraid that the retired emperor would blame her, so he reminded her, "Why are you here?" Only then did Hellion Vivian open her eyes. She lazily grunted. When she saw the group of people behind Heize gradually walking over, she quietly stood up. She was polite and good-looking, but she wasn't close to them. The retired emperor hadn't seen this side yet. He was looking sideways at the flourishing incense burning on the other side. Hei's lowered his eyes. "Follow us in later. If you stay outside and someone sees you, they will accuse you of not following the rules." "All right." Hellion Wei yawned. The corners of her eyes were still tired. She raised her head and met with Bailey Jiaju's icy cold gaze. Hellion Vivian didn't know what he was looking at. He just stared at her without blinking, his eyes as deep as a frosty well. Perhaps it had been maintained for too long. Even the young masters of influential families standing at the side quieted down. They looked at Baligaju, then looked at Hellion Vivian. They felt that something was strange. Hellion Vivian also felt her scalp go numb from the man's gaze. She was looking for an opportunity to avert her gaze. She heard the retired emperor laugh. "Isn't this that girl from the Hellion family? What? You're not going to pray for blessings? This humble girl is going." Hellion Vivian bowed as she spoke and was about to leave. The retired emperor was rather open-minded. "All right, you don't need to go by yourself. Come in with us." Yes, Hellion Vivian didn't care. In any case, she'd go in later. She'd just shake the lot pot twice. She didn't need to pray for blessings or whatever. After the retired emperor finished speaking, he turned his head and led a group of young masters into the hall. Hellion Vivian wanted to follow behind them and hide in peace. Only, she didn't expect that Baligaju's footsteps would be so slow. The 2 people walked, one in front, one behind. Baligaju also didn't speak. That cold expression of his seemed as if he didn't recognize her. Hellion Vivian played with the armament component in her hand. She actually didn't care about Baligaju's attitude. Just as she was about to go up the steps, the person in front seemed to have stopped. She suddenly heard him say in a low voice, "You're actually very good to Heize." Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. She didn't understand why the third prince would suddenly say such a thing. When her gaze met the man's in midair, she only saw that pair of eyes were so cold that there was almost no warmth. The surrounding air also followed and condensed a few degrees. As his white robe and long sleeves swayed, Hellion Vivian looked at that cold and tall figure from behind. She was slightly perplexed. Eunuch's son ran over and whispered in her ear, Eldest miss, please bear with him. His Highness isn't in a good mood today. Hellion Vivian wanted to say that she could tell, but she didn't know why. Eunuch's son also didn't have time to say more. He followed in 2 or 3 steps. In the hall, one could faintly hear the shaking of the lot pot. One sound after another very long. The servant girls all held their breaths as they stood, not daring to move carelessly. They were afraid that if they made a sound, they would disturb the peace and quiet and affect their own master's fate. By the time Hellion Vivian and the others walked in, those young ladies had already taken the lot sticks in their hands and were standing to one side. They wanted to say something but hesitated. They wanted their master to interpret their own divinations. When they raised their eyes and saw the retired emperor leading the young masters in, they were first stunned. Then they gripped the wooden lot sticks in their hands. Their faces were dyed crimson. One after another, they bowed in salute. The retired emperor waved his sleeve to let them continue. He also brought head abbot Fangzhong over, and let him interpret one of the people's divinations. One must know that it wasn't that easy to interpret a divination at the Hidden Spirit Temple. This temple was famous for only interpreting 3 divinations a day. No matter how much power you had, it was still impossible to do more. But one couldn't help but admit that the divinations at the Hidden Spirit Temple were indeed very effective. There were many high officials and nobles in the capital who spared no effort and traveled for several days just to wait for these 3 divinations in the morning. Therefore, when they heard that the abbot Fangzhong would be the one to interpret the divinations, each and every one of the young ladies holding the wooden lot looked forward to it. After all, the abbot Fangzhong didn't easily perform divinations. If they wanted to get 1 or 2 words of advice from him, it would be extremely difficult. It could be said that this time it was really convenient for them. Everyone took out the lot they had drawn. Although they didn't say what they were praying for, everyone knew that 8 or 9 times out of 10, they were praying for marriage. When the Hellion Jiaoer handed over her wooden lot, she turned her small face to look at Beligaju. Her eyes swayed, carrying a bashful expression, but also appearing very well behaved. Naturally, she stood to his left. When the servant girl saw her actions, the light in her eyes carried satisfaction. Her family's young miss was too reserved before. Now she finally knew how to take the initiative. Very good, very good. Some of the young masters also saw this scene. Their eyes flashed with obvious sadness. Hellion Vivian was still standing there, pondering how she had provoked the 3rd imperial prince. Then she heard He say, "Woman, you also go draw a lot." Chapter 202. I'm not interested in marriage. Hellion Vivian speaks the truth. Heizei looks at her like he's looking at a monster. An abnormal woman? Hellion Vivian lazily looks at him. Better than someone who doesn't even dare to admit who he likes. Heizei is immediately stuck. Hey, can we still have a pleasant chat? Although their voices are very low, it's hard to avoid attracting the attention of others. Especially since Beligaju hasn't moved his gaze away from the 2 of them from beginning to end. Eunuch's son looks at the smile on his highness's face. The more he smiles, the more horrifying it becomes. He bluntly opens his mouth. Miss Vivian should also draw a lot. Perhaps you'll be able to get it. Eunuch's son didn't expect that his words would attract everyone's gaze to Hellion Vivian. Head abbot Fangzhong strokes the white beard on his chin and smiles. This female benefactor should indeed draw a lot. This old monk has stayed in the temple for so many years, but this is the first time I've seen such a good husband's appearance. Her life is full of wisdom. She can turn misfortune into luck. Her eyebrows are full of righteousness. She should be a very rich and noble person. Everyone is astonished by the abbot's words. It must be known that Hellion Vivian has just been driven out of the defense department. Right now, her body can be considered to be empty. If it weren't for the fact that she won this time's competition within the academy, how could there be a place for her in this trip to the Hidden Spirit Temple? Why is it that in the abbot's mouth, she's a very rich and noble person? However, to be able to make the abbot personally open his mouth to read a person's fortune, there probably aren't many people in the world. Could it be that this Hellion Vivian will be able to make a comeback in the future? The aristocratic young masters all have doubtful gazes. Hellion Jiaoer is so hateful that she crumples her handkerchief, her teeth fiercely biting her thin lips. Her pair of eyes are like poisoned arsenic, but when she lowers her eyes, It's exquisitely concealed. However, at the beginning, head abbot Fengzhang only became interested in this girl Hellion Vivian after hearing the royal's words. But when he really looked at her, he felt that her appearance was indeed a little different from the rest. He continued, as for the rest, we will have to wait for the female benefactor to draw the lot. Hellion Vivian calmly accepted the gazes cast from all around. She faced head abbot Fengzhang and smiled politely, many thanks for great master's good intentions. It's Wei Wei who doesn't have Buddhist affinity. I'm used to being carefree, and I've always believed in one thing. My life is my own, not up to the heavens. Suddenly, there was a momentary pause in the hall. Everyone looked at Hellion Vivian with an indescribable gaze. Only Beligaju seemed to be curling his thin lips as he slowly adjusted his sleeves. Head abbot Fengzhang stared blankly for a moment before bursting into loud laughter. That laughter reverberated within the palace hall and didn't fade away for a long time. Worthy of being the Hellion family's bloodline. How could a golden carp not be a fish in a pond? Encountering a storm, one will transform into a dragon. Hellion Vivian, the future you truly make this old monk look forward to it. I'll be relying on Abbot Fengzhang's auspicious words. Hellion Vivian smiled faintly. Her indifference to honor and disgrace made retired emperor raise his eyebrows. Head abbot Fengzhang glanced at Beligaju, who wasn't too far away. A profound meaning was written all over his face. No wonder this icy fellow took a fancy to this girl. There were many people who believed in Buddhism under the heavens, yet they didn't understand the cause and effect. How could this Hellion Vivian not have Buddhist affinity? Clearly, her heart didn't have any fear. Her comprehension was more thorough than others. She was actually very suitable for this cold and emotionless icy fellow. Retired emperor finally figured it out. Perhaps it was also because of this point. Beligaju actually didn't look at him. His pair of eyes were downcast, making people unable to see any emotion. The Hellion Jiaoer was listening from the side. Her entire heart twisted, but her face was still brimming with a smiling expression. Only, in a place where no one was around, her pair of hands were clenched until they were somewhat deformed. The servant girl didn't know what to say and could only move her hands and feet. She moved the Buddhist lot that belonged to the Hellion Jiaoer to the front. Head abbot Fengzhang smiled as he picked up one of the Buddhist lots. In a few words he solved the hexagram. The Hellion Jiaoer's lot was the best lot. It was also the only good lot among the young ladies of the aristocratic families. It attracted everyone's exclamations. The best lot indeed wasn't easy to find. It could be seen how good the Hellion Jiaoer's fate was. Head abbot Fengzhang took that lot and solved the hexagram. The first part was actually good, but towards the end it was somewhat vague. But one couldn't help but admit that the Hellion Jiaoer's hexagram was the best out of all of them. The young ladies of the aristocratic families, who previously had thoughts of guarding against the Hellion Jiaoer, once again looked towards this side. Their eyes were filled with envy. The servant girl by the Hellion Jiaoer's side raised her chin very high. As if on purpose, she swept a glance in the direction of the Hellion Vivian. Hellion Vivian wasn't so idle that she would bicker with a little servant girl. Her eyes stared at the corner of the Buddhist statue and her shapely eyebrows raised. Some people just can't find the best lot. They don't even dare to touch the lot pot. Women, even if they didn't want to admit it, but they really did have the mentality of stepping on the low and bullying the high. They liked to see others make a fool of themselves. When added with jealousy, they couldn't help but want to talk when they met. Hellion Vivian raised the corner of her lips, as if she didn't place this kind of provocation in her eyes at all. The servant girl standing by the Hellion Jiaoer's side also couldn't put up with it. Recently, because of that little slut Hellion Vivian, she had suffered quite a bit of anger. Now she seized the opportunity and said in a strange tone, "Isn't that so? I'm just afraid that I'll draw the worst lot." When the Hellion Jiaoer heard this, she pretended to reprimand, "Go away. You really don't know the rules more and more." The servant girl shrank her shoulders, but when she saw that there wasn't a trace of displeasure on her Mrs. face, she knew that she had taken this step with Mrs. Hart. "Big sister, you don't need to bicker with these servants," the Hellion Jiaoer gently said. "I thought a lot about yesterday's matter. Mother also taught me that in the future I must love Big Sister. Just now, even the abbot said that Big Sister's fate is extraordinary. If you touch the lot pot and ruin your fate, it won't be good. When Yuan Ming woke up, he just happened to hear this sentence. He smiled wickedly. Woman, she is provoking you. If I were you, I definitely wouldn't tolerate it. If I were you, I wouldn't come out at this time. This is a Buddhist place. When Hellion Vivian smiled, it was easy to think of the word devil. Yuan Ming coldly snorted. The reason why this venerable is afraid of these Buddha statues is because this venerable hasn't completely recovered yet. Wait until this venerable recovers. This venerable will crush all of these things. I don't know who it is, but when he just entered the temple, he hid in the Xuanhuan space. Hellion Vivian said indifferently. Yuan Ming curved his thin lips. Woman, the one that is being looked down upon right now isn't this venerable, it's you. Looked down upon? Hellion Weiwei's beautiful phoenix-shaped eyes looked up and strolled to the front of the pot. She picked up a row of unfolded wooden sticks and put all of them into the pot. The Hellion Jiaoer's red lips were half raised. She was waiting to see Hellion Vivian make a fool of herself. One must know that it wasn't that this little slut had never drawn a lot before. Every time she drew a bad lot, it had never changed even after 10 years. This time, just wait for her to lose face. Chapter 203. Voila! Hellion Vivian's left hand held the bamboo pot, casually shaking it. Her movements weren't as pious as the other young ladies, but it carried an indescribable handsomeness. Eunuch Sun sighed and muttered in a low voice, why doesn't this look like a drawing of lots, but more like shaking a sieve cup? Hearing this, Bailey Jiaju raised his eyes. A trace of light flashed through his indifferent eyes, faintly discernible. Letting Hellion Vivian fiddle with these bamboo pots and such was really a bit difficult for her. She casually assumed the posture of entering a casino, shaking it a few times. After getting the feeling, she raised her white hand. The wooden lot fell down. The little monk standing at the side presented that wooden lot to Abbot Fangzhang. Abbot Fangzhang looked at that lot and laughed heartily. Wonderful, wonderful. Oh! Retired Emperor made a sound. After receiving that lot, he raised his eyebrows in astonishment. Hellion Jiaoer realized that something was wrong, suddenly looking towards Hellion Vivian. She saw that she was smiling at her, shaking the bamboo pot in her hand again, with an appearance full of evil aura. Pa! The second lot fell down. This divination was truly perfect. At this time, even the little monk was a bit unsettled after seeing the lot on top. He couldn't help but take another look at Hellion Vivian. Both are the best of the best. Abbot Fangzhang stroked his beard. This is rare. Both are the best of the best. There was an uproar in the main hall, looking at each other in dismay. When they looked at Hellion Vivian again, there was a faint trace of envy and admiration. The servant girl standing by Hellion Jiaoer's side was stunned, subconsciously looking at her young lady's face. Sure enough, it was ashen. How could this be? The servant girl's entire body was a bit silly, because in the past, they used to mock the eldest young lady about drawing lots. At that time, the eldest young lady would follow the other young ladies to the temple every year. The young ladies loathed her, but she didn't know. When it came to drawing lots, she was more active than anyone else, afraid that others wouldn't know that she admired the heir. What she drew lots for was a predestined marriage. Every time she drew lots, she would lose face, making a lot of jokes. What was wrong with this little bitch today? How could a person's fate be changed? How come she had never heard of such a thing? Hellion Jiaoer clenched her fists. No matter how unwilling she was, she had to force a smile. Hellion Vivian was straightforward. When she passed by Hellion Jiaoer, she suddenly leaned over and gently patted the dust off her shoulder. She spoke in a voice that was neither too low nor too loud, as if she didn't care if others heard her. Her voice was clear and long. Sister, what do you think? Does your face hurt? Such an inexplicable sentence made the people around him somewhat unable to understand. However, the Hellion Jiaoer understood. Her little face completely stiffened, and the forced smile disappeared from the corners of her mouth. There was a hint of malevolence in her usually delicate eyes. Hellion Vivian didn't care about her. She returned to her original position. She was still as relaxed and indolent as before. Hellion Jiaoer twisted a handkerchief. She looked like she couldn't wait to eat Hellion Vivian. Come to think of it, if Hellion Vivian didn't say anything after drawing the best lot, perhaps Hellion Jiaoer wouldn't feel so shameful. From the beginning, the people who understood could see that this Hellion Jiaoer clearly wanted to see Hellion Vivian make a fool of herself. In the end, not only did Hellion Vivian not make a fool of herself, she even drew 2 of the best lots in the lot pot. This was even better than Hellion Jiaoer's divination. Hellion Jiaoer was originally fuming in her heart, but Hellion Vivian actually asked her if her face hurt. This was the rhythm of angering people to death. When head abbot Feng Zhang saw this scene, he used all his strength to look at Bailey Jiaju. His meaning seemed to be saying, how come the person you fancy has the same appearance as you? Don't open your mouth, don't open your mouth. Once you open your mouth, you can be choked to death by a living person. Baligaju indifferently looked back at him. What? You have an opinion? Head abbot Feng Zhang silently looked at the sky. What opinion could he have? He just wanted to ask him, where did he find such a girl? In this world, it's also very hard to find someone with such a venomous tongue like the royal family. Baligaju didn't look at head abbot Feng Zhang again. His pair of eyes only sunk, without the slightest trace of a smile in them. Head abbot Feng Zhang followed his gaze and saw Hellion Vivian tilting her head to talk to He Zi. No one heard what they were saying. He saw He Zi smile at her, with a doting appearance that said he couldn't do anything to her. Crack. Head abbot Feng Zhang heard the small Buddha statue by his hand forcibly crack. He deeply wrinkled his white brows. He seemed to have thought of this matter too simply before. No, it's not him. It's them. They've always wanted such a person by His Highness's side, the most suitable person. But they never thought that perhaps that person would be unwilling. But with His Highness's temperament, the things he wants, he must obtain. Moreover, he must obtain them completely. In other words, this thing had to be completely clean. It doesn't matter if he's currently treating Hellion Vivian as prey, or if he's only a little bit interested in her. Once Hellion Vivian has a relationship with another man, he's really afraid that His Highness will do something. For example, destroying Hellion Vivian. The more head abbot Feng Zhang thought, the more worried he became. He glanced to the side and exchanged a glance with retired emperor. Sure enough, retired emperor was thinking the same thing as him. That's because one could see the helplessness on his face. Head abbot Feng Zhang could imagine that if there were no other people around, retired emperor would definitely press his forehead. The crucial point is, His Highness never cared about others, even himself. He must obtain what he wants and he doesn't care about the cost. The harder it is to obtain, the more he'll be interested in it. This is what gives retired emperor and head abbot Feng Zhang a headache. Because according to the current situation, they already can't stop him. Indifference, elegance, and grace, these are only his outer clothes. Once this outer layer is removed, he'll bring about a destructive power that no one can estimate. Just like that year's fire, no one knows how many people he's slaughtered. This is also a worry that has been pressing down on retired emperor's heart for many years. He and retired emperor don't know how he, who hasn't reached adulthood yet, survived that fire. But when they saw a youth who hasn't reached adulthood yet sitting on the throne with an indifferent expression, with countless corpses piled up behind him, other than rejoicing, there's also fear that surges out from their hearts. Since that time, retired emperor was worried that His Highness would walk on the path of the devil. Fortunately, when His Highness woke up, he wasn't any different from usual. Only, his temperament became more and more indifferent, and his disguise also became more and more flawless. Everyone thought that he was handsome and harmless, but they've never seen his smile that isn't a smile as he raises his hand to kill people. Chapter 204. Wait, what's going on? Yuan Ming, who was originally peacefully staying in the Xuanhuan space, felt as if his blood vessels were being summoned by something. It was surging and almost manifesting his primordial spirit. He forcefully suppressed his demonic nature and coughed heavily. Woman, move closer to the Buddha statue. Hellion Vivian frowned. What's wrong with you? Knowing Yuan Ming for so long, she had never seen him like this. I always feel that something is wrong. Yuan Ming narrowed his eyes. After waiting until Wei Wei shifted her position, that restlessness unexpectedly disappeared. His expression, which was filled with doubt, sank, bringing out a silence that was different from the past. Hellion Wei Wei didn't have the opportunity to ask Yuan Ming again, because when she shifted, she happened to be behind a certain highness. She didn't even lift her head and bumped into that tall and straight, slightly cold back as hard as a rock. She wanted to say sorry, but obviously, the people around didn't think it was an accident, and had begun to despise her with the eyes of a love-struck fool. Hellion Vivian simply didn't even say sorry, met the man's indifferent eyes, smiled and wanted to retreat. Unexpectedly, the other side opened his mouth, and there was no fluctuation in the tone, and the tone was cold. Don't move anymore. When the young ladies heard this, they looked at each other and more or less understood. His Highness was tired of her, otherwise with His Highness's temperament, how could he speak at this time? It was obvious that he saw through her boring tricks and warned her. Hellion Vivian hummed, and there was nothing to care about standing there. The main thing was that Yuan Xiaoming couldn't wake up again. What was going on? Bailey Jiaju looked at the person standing behind him. She had a fierce expression on her face, and he didn't know what she was thinking about. He suddenly had an urge to reach out and pinch her. Perhaps he wanted to test how thick her skin was. However, this person was the most pleasing to the eye when she stood behind him. Baligaju hooked up his lips, and a smile flashed through his eyes quickly, so that no one could catch it. Hellion Vivian was still fantasizing about shaking Yuan Xiaoming, and she didn't notice the attitude of the royal family. The two of them were clearly standing one in front of the other, but they didn't give off a distant feeling. Perhaps it was because Baligaju's face was slightly tilted to the side. When the sun shone down, it seemed to soften the lines of his jawline, and even his thin lips were glowing. Eunuch Sun watched from the side and more or less understood the situation. He stood to the left to make space for the two of them, deliberately separating Hellion Jiaoer from them. Hellion Jiaoer now hated Hellion Vivian so much that her teeth itched, but she couldn't say anything to Eunuch Sunday. She could only stand there awkwardly. It seemed that they were close, but in fact there was a person between them. This made her plan to take the opportunity to get close to Baligaju disappear. Hellion Vivian saw that she couldn't wake Yuan Xiaoming up, so she didn't insist. She just wondered what he said before he fell asleep. When she came back to her senses, she saw that Baligaju was looking at her. Hellion Vivian didn't understand the meaning of the royal family. She raised her eyebrows. You suddenly bumped into me. Do you think this royal highness can understand that you are throwing yourself at me? His voice was very low. Hellion Vivian wanted to say that all this was a coincidence, but there was no way to explain why she could bump into the back of the third prince in just 2 steps. She felt that her reputation was ruined by the hands of Yuan Xiaoming. A burden. Your Royal Highness, you think too much. Hellion Vivian smiled, bright eyes and white teeth, the taste of sunshine. Bailey Jiaju's eyes turned cold. Is that so? Yes. Hellion Vivian was afraid that he would misunderstand, so she thought for a moment and added, I really don't have a crush on you. After hearing this, Baligaju suddenly curved his thin lips. That kind of smile was too devilish, so bright that only Hellion Vivian could see it. There were even stubble of ice in his eyes, as bright as gemstones. Inexplicably, Hellion Vivian felt that she had said something wrong. The meaning was very simple. It was to say that the clouds and mist had dispersed, and the sweetness had come after the bitterness. It was even to the extent of showing off one's ability, which was very much in line with Hellion Vivian's situation. The second stick, however, made head abbot Fengzhang stare blankly, because what was written on it was none other than the sentence he had just said. Isn't a golden carp a fish in a pond? Encountering wind and cloud, it transforms into a dragon. Although at the beginning, he had indeed given Hellion Vivian this kind of evaluation. But generally speaking, when a woman was looking for a stick, it was very rare for her to get this kind of divination. This was simply the best of the best. Head Abbot Fengzhang had no choice but to start sizing up Hellion Vivian again, more or less having some doubts. According to reason, with the rumor of a genius reincarnated Phoenix Girl, she shouldn't have gotten a better stick than Phoenix Girl. In the end, what had gone wrong here? Look at Abbot Fengzhang, what's wrong with him? A sharp-eyed person saw Head Abbot Fengzhang's hesitation. The young master fanning himself guessed. Could it be that the second stick's words aren't good? Sometimes, even if it was the best stick, it still had to be explained by the words of the 2 sticks. It wasn't that this kind of situation hadn't been encountered when looking for a stick. For example, the first stick's words were very good, but if the second stick's words just happened to clash with it, then even if the two sticks were the best, the result wouldn't be very good. This was the magic of divination. Therefore, what the second stick's words were was very important to the divination. Everyone observed head abbot Feng Zhang's expression and lightly laughed. It seems that someone is going to be happy for nothing. Let's wait until the divination is solved first. When Helian Jiao heard that there was a change in the divination, the smile on her face rose again. She just said, how could an ugly woman who'd run out of luck every time be able to get a better divination than her? However, when head abbot Feng Zhang read out the words of the stick word by word, her face instantly sank. This sentence basically didn't need head abbot Feng Zhang to explain. Everyone could understand. It was because they understood too well that they looked at Helian Vivian with disbelieving eyes. Before, when head abbot Feng Zhang said it, they didn't completely believe it. After all, a woman who was expelled from her family, no matter what, could she still flip the heavens? Now that they looked at this stick for the first time, they began to look at Helian Vivian seriously. But they didn't know that it was already too late for them to look at her seriously, because they wouldn't have thought that the trash that they thought had just climbed out of the quagmire had already become profound heaven's boss. Moreover, her martial chi had already reached level 8, far higher than Helian Jiao by several levels. The mysterious expert that made the four great clans constantly think about and want to rope in was her. Chapter 205. After praying for marriage, it's time to fulfill the last wish. The imperial family doesn't need to perform a big ceremony like ordinary families to offer incense. Retired emperor only took 3 sticks and bowed towards the main Buddha. He didn't kneel, let alone kowtow. Abbot Feng Zhang escorted him all the way down the forest road. Probably because he's still thinking about the wooden lot just now, Abbot Feng Zhang's face clearly showed a bit of absent-mindedness. Retired emperor left him behind and let the young ladies of each aristocratic family enter their respective carriages first. What do you think of this, Helian Vivian? Retired emperor and Abbot Feng Zhang walked to the edge of the forest. Looking at that distant figure, they hesitantly opened their mouth. Abbot Feng Zhang lowered his eyes, respectfully with a bit of worry. This old monk feels that she's a bit similar to that servant girl by His Highness' side. Probably because it's been too long. This old monk can't say for sure. Retired emperor's eyes sank. You're saying that he chose Helian Vivian because of that servant girl? This old monk can't answer you, retired emperor. Because this old monk isn't His Highness, I can't be sure what His Highness is thinking. Abbot Feng Zhang's voice also slowly lowered. Perhaps he's just purely interested. Retired emperor clenched his hands. If Aju doesn't get Helian Vivian, what will happen to him? Perhaps one day that servant girl comes back. What will happen to Helian Vivian? He will. I think you know, retired emperor. Regarding that servant girl's existence, it's impossible for His Highness not to be aware. Even if he doesn't know now, someone will think of a way to let him know. When that time comes, this old monk can't predict what kind of situation it will become. Head abbot Feng Zhang paused for a bit, then said again. Didn't you say that it's very possible that His Highness has already recovered his chi? Since that's the case, I think according to his habits, once he has a proper master, he wouldn't want a substitute. What's more, even now, you and I still haven't figured out what kind of attitude he's holding towards this substitute. Perhaps it's just like what you said at the beginning, that he's only using Wei Wei. When the retired emperor heard this, he pondered for a moment. Then he looked back and said, anyone is fine. But only that servant girl. I will never allow her to get close to Aju. She is a disaster to the imperial family. Back then I should have tried my best to kill her. Now everything will be fine. Amiba. Head abbot Feng Zhang clasped his hands together. He didn't like to talk about killing. The retired emperor steadied his thoughts. When he opened his mouth again, he was as calm and wise as usual. Then, let him obtain Helian Vivian for him before he knows that the servant girl has returned. Head abbot Feng Zhang furrowed his brows. Isn't this a bit too unfair to Helian Vivian? Obviously, she was only a substitute. No, perhaps it was more appropriate to say that she was a rake. The retired emperor was still pushing her into the fire pit. The retired emperor didn't speak. Head Abbot Fengzhang knew that this was a decision that he had already made. The imperial family had always been ruthless, especially those who had reached a high position, even more so. The retired emperor met his line of sight, as if he was making a promise. When the time comes, if she really can't change Aju, I will let her withdraw without a single mistake. Head Abbot Fengzhang was astonished. The retired emperor believes that the Hellion family's girl can change his highness? Let's take a gamble. The retired emperor looked at the figure not far away. Aju isn't the kind of person who will lose his head for anyone. What those elders thought of may not necessarily be effective on him, but I have to leave him with something to think about. Head Abbot Fengzhang stared blankly. He suddenly felt that his body was somewhat cold. The retired emperor put it nicely as a thought, but in reality, if His Highness always kept that maid's shadow in his heart, then as far as Hellion Vivian was concerned, no matter how well she lived, she was still only a substitute. Even if one day His Highness personally killed that maid, it would still be the same. It was just a pity that such a good stick was lost. According to reason, the person who was able to draw that wooden stick absolutely wouldn't walk this path in the future. Head Abbot Fengzhang lifted his eyes again and looked towards a direction not far away. He only hoped that in this game, that unique little girl wouldn't sink too deeply. Amitba, the retired emperor, looked at Head Abbot Fengzhang's appearance of putting his palms together. He extended his hand to let the accompanying eunuchs support him as he walked over. At that moment he felt that he really was old. If he was still young, he definitely wouldn't take advantage of Hellion Vivian, this little girl. The more he looked at her, the more he felt that this girl's character was good, that she was sensible. However, there was no other way. His grandson needed this kind of person by his side. Even if it was a fire pit, he could only push her in. At this time, after coming out of the temple, Yuan Ming was finally able to speak. However, his voice still sounded unusually weak. He lazily nestled in the Xuanhuan space, looking like he didn't plan to come out for the time being. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. What happened? I also can't say. Yuan Ming thought about what happened just now. I always felt that at that time, there was a very familiar aura. However, when you bumped into that third prince from behind, that aura disappeared. However, the shaking was too big. You have to give this senior a bit of time to recover his strength. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes. What aura? I'm not sure yet. Wait until I'm sure, then I'll tell you. I'm going to sleep first. Yuan Ming waved his hand, directly blocking the mental communication. However, he hit something in his heart. He didn't know if it was his misperception. In that instant, he actually felt that man's aura. How was that possible? That man's primordial spirit had already been destroyed. How could he still be in this world? It must be that he thought too much. Yuan Ming yawned and rubbed the small book cover that Hellion Vivian gave him with a big heart. He began to devour the aura and cultivate. When Hellion Vivian saw him like this, she didn't continue to ask more questions. She wouldn't ask a devil to tell her the truth about everything. Lying was a devil's nature. Since Yuan Ming didn't want to say it, she didn't need to get to the bottom of it. It's just that it was very rare to see him like this. This made Wei Wei somewhat unable to figure out what happened just now. Obviously, the inside of the temple appeared to be harmonious. If one had to say something, it would be that third prince appeared to be somewhat unhappy. Hellion Vivian recalled the scene in the temple just now and slightly frowned. Miss Vivian. Just as she was thinking, she suddenly heard someone calling her. When she turned around, she saw Eunuch Sun standing behind her. There was hesitation on his face. There is one thing that this slave wants to trouble Miss Vivian to help. Hellion Vivian withdrew her hand from opening the carriage curtain. She smiled faintly. What's the matter? His Royal Highness' hand was injured when the retired emperor offered incense. Until now, he hasn't applied medicine. Eunuch Sun said anxiously. When he met Hellion Vivian's eyes, he sighed. His Royal Highness probably forgot, but when he saw the carriage, he gave an order that no one was allowed to approach it. This old slave is worried about His Royal Highness' hands. On such a hot day, will pus form? Chapter 206. It's not to the extent of pus. Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips and helped him out of the predicament. However, if there are scars on His Highness' hands, it will affect their beauty. Should I go with Eunuch Sun to take a look? Eunuch Sun seemed to have seen his savior. His eyes lit up and he reached out his hand. Eldest miss, follow this old servant to this side. As he spoke, he turned his head and instructed those little eunuchs. You guys go ahead first. If anyone dares to speak of today's matter, be careful of your neck. Hellion Vivian knew that this was to pave the way for her. Fortunately, the Hellion Jiaoer and the others had already left. Otherwise, if they saw Hellion Vivian enter the royal family's carriage, many things would happen. Eunuch Sun's words were to help Hellion Vivian avoid these troubles, thereby achieving the goal of protecting Hellion Vivian. After all, if a woman was jealous and did something malicious, it would be hard to guard against. Eunuch Sun led Hellion Vivian all the way over. He originally wanted to let him report, but at this time, the retired emperor's carriage was also lifted. He suddenly didn't know what to do. Hellion Vivian naturally saw that he was busy, but she didn't care. I'll go over by myself. Eunuch Sun, you can go do your own thing. Then I'll have to trouble Miss Vivian. Eunuch Sun turned his head and instructed the little eunuch who was leading the way, then hurriedly walked over to the retired emperor's carriage. The little eunuch probably hadn't been with Eunuch Sun for a long time. He didn't even look at Wei Wei's eyes and lowered his head. Miss Wei Wei, His Highness' carriage is over there. Hellion Vivian looked up and saw a carved black wooden carriage not far away. That carriage was very large and didn't have any extra decorations. The carriage roof was carved with floating clouds and was made of the best sandalwood. It was low-key and revealed a sense of luxury that was difficult to hide. Okay, I got it. Hellion Vivian walked over but was stopped a meter away. That was also a small eunuch who served Bailey Jiaju the entire way. Seeing that Wei Wei had arrived, the way he spoke didn't carry any trace of politeness. This young lady, look clearly. Your carriage is over there, not here with His Highness. Hellion Vivian knew that he was doing what he should do. After all, if everyone could get close to the third prince's carriage, then there would be trouble. Just as Hellion Vivian was about to explain the purpose of her visit, a voice suddenly rang out. However, the young eunuch muttered again. Does he really think that it's so easy to curry favor with His Highness? Not only did he use underhanded means in the Buddhist hall, but now he's trying to curry favor with His Highness. Doesn't he know that His Highness hates this the most? Curry favor? After Wei Wei heard these two words, she sneered and extended her hand to pull him over by the collar. Her tone of voice was neither light nor indifferent. I was invited by your eunuch son to apply medicine for His Highness. However, it seems that there's no need for that now. After her words fell, Hellion Vivian turned around and planned to leave. The young eunuch snorted disapprovingly. She was invited by Eunuch Sun? Who was she trying to fool? Did she think that she was a great beauty? If it was someone like Miss Jiaoer, who had a good family background and good looks, saying these kinds of words would make sense. Look at her face, it was so dark that people didn't dare to compliment her. What's more, in the Buddhist hall, His Highness was already disgusted with this woman. He definitely didn't want her to come close. The young eunuch raised his chin and was immensely pleased with himself. Then, he heard a voice from the carriage without any warmth. It was so cold and indifferent that it made people's scalps go numb. If she leaves, then use your head in exchange. That voice was very light, but even so, it made the young eunuch so scared that he knelt on the ground in a flash. Royal family, this servant. The young eunuch trembled from head to toe. Beligaju didn't even look at him. This Highness actually didn't know. When did Miss Hellion stick to this Highness? Could it be that no one told you that this Highness doesn't like to be misunderstood? This servant. The young eunuch only felt that he was wronged. He also heard those people say that His Highness loathed this love-struck Hellion Vivian. After all, His Highness had never let any woman receive him like this. But now, it seemed that they'd all guessed His Highness's thoughts wrongly. Beligaju's voice didn't have the slightest undulation. Shadow, take him away and cut his tongue. Tell those eunuchs that what they shouldn't say. They should all shut their mouths for this Highness. Don't speak carelessly. Yes. Shadow used some strength and lifted the eunuch up. That young eunuch had long since not dared to open his mouth to speak. His lips were pale and colorless, ugly to look at. Those who wanted to harm others didn't have a good end. Hellion Vivian stood to the side and also didn't make a sound. She only calmly watched. She actually didn't think that the royal family would be so angry. But thinking about it carefully, his methods were originally like this. Perhaps it was precisely because of this kind of iron-blooded method that the 4 great clans wouldn't act blindly without thinking. Come up. The voice inside the carriage sounded again. Although it was still as indifferent as before, it didn't have the baleful aura of a moment ago. Hellion Vivian was still thinking about what happened just now and didn't react. Then she heard Beligaju say another sentence. Could it be that you want this prince to personally go down and carry you up? Hellion Vivian was taken for granted by his kind of reasoning. In addition, his tone didn't carry the slightest bit of emotion, making her somewhat speechless. Let the royal family carry her up the carriage? Even if Eunuch Sun had the heart to help her conceal it, it was estimated that within 2 hours, all the students would know about this news. Because that kind of scene really gave off too strong of a feeling of impulse. Hellion Weiwei even had some doubts whether or not she would be shot to death by someone's gaze. It seems that you really want this prince to carry you. Hearing this, Hellion Vivian hurriedly said, You stand there, don't move. I'll go up by myself. Aren't you going to leave? She didn't know if it was her own misconception, but Hellion Vivian always felt that the 3 words royal family carried a bit of loneliness. Hellion Vivian's hand that was lifting the curtain paused for a moment. When she actually entered the carriage, she knew that she was wrong. Her so-called loneliness just now was completely because a certain highness had just woken up, causing his voice to be a bit hoarse. It seemed like he still hadn't woken up from his sleep. His eyes were half closed, and his thick eyebrows and dark eyelashes were lowered, reflecting a dark shadow. His ink-like long curly hair draped over his back. Inside he wore a pure white robe. However, the collar of the robe had been pulled open by him. Large roses were embroidered on the luxurious brocade with silver thread. It was extraordinarily exquisite. Even the cuffs of his sleeves were embroidered with half a lotus. His entire person was elegant to the extreme from inside out. This kind of Beligaju lacked the indifferent, holy, and noble appearance that he had in front of others. Instead, he was more languid and deadly sexy. He was half lying on the fur-covered chaise lounge in the carriage. One of his long legs was half bent. Even when she came in, he didn't lift his eyelids. Chapter 207. Hellion Vivian didn't need him to greet her. She rolled up her sleeves and leaned close to look at him. Which hand was it hurt? Beligaju then opened his pair of extremely beautiful eyes and faintly glanced at her. After that, he opened up his left hand. Sure enough, there was a wound in the center of his palm, and there were even beads of blood on it. If Eunuch Sun knew that one day, Beligaju could be so cooperative, his eyeballs would definitely fall out of their sockets. The shadows standing outside the carriage also had the same feeling. At the same time they breathed a sigh of relief, but at the same time they also felt that it was inconceivable. In their memories, when had His Highness ever been this obedient? It seemed like it had never happened before. He wouldn't even let a woman touch his fingers. Even that person in the past was the same. But ever since this Hellion family's young miss appeared, Master's habits became more and more unfathomable. Thinking of this, the shadows couldn't help but look in the direction of the carriage. Their eyes were filled with admiration for Hellion Vivian. Hellion Vivian didn't know how difficult it was to deal with the royal family normally. Just now, when she was standing in the Buddhist hall, she unexpectedly didn't see the wound on the man's hand at all. It was clear that the royal family wanted to hide something. If he didn't want to, then no one would know. Hellion Vivian looked at that wound. It didn't look like it was caused by a sharp weapon. Rather, it looked like the royal family had crushed something. In the end, who made him so angry? Hellion Vivian swept a glance at the arrangement inside the carriage. She also didn't find any ointment. Instead, there was a handkerchief. However, this kind of wound generally needed to be disinfected. What she was afraid of was that there were some shards stuck inside. Thinking of this, Hellion Vivian stood up. She didn't expect that this kind of action would touch the man's reverse scale. It made him ignore the wound on his hand and directly grab her wrist. His eyes as deep as the cold pool of midnight watched Hellion Vivian attentively. His tone was indifferent. Where are you going? The silhouette of the man with a silver mask had an illusory beauty that was otherworldly. Only his pale thin lips gave people a sense of cold asceticism. His pure white clothes had some golden embroidered clouds at this moment, making him look even more noble. Being looked up at by him, Hellion Vivian always felt that in his eyes, she was his whole world. It was probably because he was used to being looked down upon by the royal family. Hellion Vivian told herself that, but she still felt that this royal was more likable. At the very least, she didn't have a venomous tongue. Unexpectedly, Beligaju's next sentence was, "Do you want to go out now and smash someone to death? It's really rare to bump into someone while walking." Hellion Vivian. Other than attacking her intelligence, would the royal family talk to her about anything else? Suddenly, without any warning, Bailey Jiaju forcefully pulled and pressed her into his embrace. His white robe danced in an arc along with his movement. He pinched her chin and then slowly raised it. His pair of eyes were slightly cold. "In the future, stay further away from Heize. Do you understand?" "What's wrong with Heize?" Hellion Vivian frowned. She subconsciously thought that he was thinking about the involvement of the four great families. She lowered her eyes and said, "Don't worry, I know what to do. Even if we have a good relationship, there are some things that shouldn't be said, so I won't say it." "So shouldn't your highness let go of your hand?" Hellion Vivian used her strength and skillfully pressed down on his wrist. She lightly flung it away and then tidied up her clothes. "Your highness, in the future just say what you want to say. Don't use your hands. In order to avoid misunderstandings, we have to say this properly." With every sentence she said, the man's ink-black eyes became even more gloomy. By the time she finished her last sentence, those ink-black eyes were already suffused with a faint golden light. Beligaju's gaze very slowly swept over Hellion Vivian's body. After that, he slowly said, "You have a good relationship?" Hellion Vivian didn't understand why he would ask so much about Heize. He probably didn't want her to be involved with the four great families. After thinking for a while, she said, "We'll talk about him later. Where's the ointment? Where is it? Didn't you put it in the cubicle last time?" "I threw it away." It was still the same indifferent and slightly cold voice. He said it so confidently. At the same time, Wei Wei couldn't be reasoned with, but at the same time, she also felt that it was indeed Third Prince's style. Whatever he did, it was always based on his own mood. Wei Wei almost suspected that if he wanted to obtain the throne, wouldn't it also be something that could be easily obtained? Unfortunately, the royal family didn't seem to have a very high interest in the throne. It wasn't enough. He just didn't have an interest. He also wouldn't allow other people to steal the power that belonged to the royal family. That's why the four great families were mentally and physically exhausted when they encountered such a prince. They wanted to rope him in, but they didn't have a way to rope him in. They wanted to deal with him, but they were always miserably dealt with. Hellion Vivian shook her head. She extended her finger and poked his palm. Her attitude was very casual, as if she was talking to a partner that she used to do everything with in the past. "I can't not deal with it. I'll go ask them for the ointment and needles." Beligaju raised his eyebrows and looked at her. He didn't let her get up again. Instead, he ordered outside, "Prepare a new set of the things that this highness just threw away and send them in." His voice was very light. It had a magnetic texture, and it couldn't be changed from being cold and luxurious. Hellion Vivian thought in her heart, no wonder all the young ladies in the capital wanted to marry him. This kind of man indeed had the capital to captivate people everywhere. Fortunately, her willpower was relatively strong. Compared to handsome men, she loved money more. The main thing was that a handsome man like the royal family couldn't be bought with money, and it was too dangerous. Therefore, Hellion Vivian could only admire him and didn't have any other thoughts. In less than a minute, the well-trained shadows had prepared a set of all the things that Bailey Jiaju had thrown away in the past according to their original appearance. The carriage also slowly moved forward. When Hellion Vivian took the box of ointment, she smelled it and felt that it was familiar. Her eyebrows raised. "Don't tell me that you just threw a box of Tianshan Snow Lotus." Bailey Jiaju indifferently hummed in agreement. "Hellion Vivian, boss, that's Tianshan Snow Lotus. It wasn't an ordinary flower or plant." "Is there a difference?" Beligaju looked at her. His tone was steady without a trace of fluctuation. Hellion Vivian was speechless. She always felt that she was very wasteful. In the modern era, she spent a lot of money to buy a basement just to put her guns and toys. Now, compared to a certain highness, she was simply a little expert at saving money. Throwing Tianshan Snow Lotus? Haha. He might as well throw out a chest of silvers. The more Hellion Wei Wei came into contact with his highness, the more she discovered that her Prince Charming's otherworldly nature was mainly manifested in two aspects. One was his unfathomable thoughts and methods that could change the weather with a flip of his hand. The other was that he really was very rich. You're so far away from this highness. How are you going to apply the ointment? Chapter 208. Beligaju's slender and white fingers rested on the short sandalwood table. His emotionless eyes fell on Hellion Vivian's body, and his eyebrows raised. Hellion Vivian felt that she was close enough. This carriage was the biggest, but there wasn't much space. If she moved a little closer, the two of them would inevitably have physical contact. It's easy to get hurt if you get closer. Hellion Vivian turned her face to the side and dipped the needle in the ointment ground from the Tianshan Snow Lotus. She didn't raise her head and said, "It's not good to offend His Highness when the time comes." He seemed to look at her, and his tone was indifferent. "There's nothing bad about it." Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and looked into his eyes. She was still wondering if this man's misophobia had been cured. She heard him slowly open his mouth. "Sooner or later, I'll offend you." When he said the word offend, she didn't know if it was intentional or not, but he reached over Hellion Vivian and put down the curtain behind her. His voice was neither light nor heavy as it brushed past Hellion Vivian's ear. When his breath hit her ear, it always made people feel a little numb. Hellion Vivian turned her face to the side and looked at the man's cold eyes. She shifted her position. This man was simply the evildoer of evildoers. If he wanted to bewitch someone in the future, it would be very easy. Hellion Vivian raised her head and smiled. She moved closer and naturally held Beligaju's wrist with one hand. She held the silver needle in the other hand and slowly opened the place where it should be broken into pieces. Her whole person gave people a very comfortable feeling. However, she still felt that the two of them were too close to each other. She didn't know if the royal had any complaints about her touching his hand. The whole time, he lowered his eyes to look at her. The sense of presence was too strong, making Hellion Vivian wrinkle her eyebrows several times. However, this didn't affect Hellion Vivian's treatment of the wound. Her hand didn't even tremble. First, she picked the ointment in his palm. Crush the dregs and apply the ointment directly, then tie it up with a white handkerchief. Done. All right. Hellion Vivian stood up. She wanted to stop the carriage so that she could get off. However, Bailey Jiaju instructed the people outside. "Hurry up, go to the front." Hellion Vivian. On the wooden table, the smoke in the mouth of the Qilin incense burner became thinner and thinner. Beligaju opened the lid of the burner and swept a glance at her. "If you go down now, everyone will know that you have boarded my carriage." No, she didn't mean that at all. If others found out, there would be endless trouble. The thing she was most lazy to deal with was trouble. Hellion Vivian yawned and was a little sleepy. "Then when can I go down?" Beligaju's beautiful eyes narrowed. She didn't like to stay in the same carriage as him. As if inadvertently, Beligaju threw away the lid in his hand and leaned back with a faint smile. "You can also go." If she moved, he would break her pair of claws, so that he wouldn't be annoyed by it. Hellion Vivian glanced at him and felt that this person was a little unhappy. She frowned. "Then tell them to stop." Beligaju's fingers, which were hidden under his long sleeves, clenched. He smiled wickedly and said coldly, "Drive faster." Hellion Vivian. Was the royal deliberately making things difficult for her today? Did they have to be so unreasonable? "Perhaps I can stay here for a while before going down?" Chatting until now, Wei Wei had a bit of awareness. Third Prince didn't want other people to know about the relationship between the two of them right now. Beligaju grunted and slightly tilted his head to the left, as if he didn't want Hellion Vivian to see his current mood. Hellion Vivian didn't care where she slept. In any case, as long as she met with Heizei before entering the capital and discussed the matter of the martial chi competition, it would be fine. Thinking like this, she casually found a place to sit down and leaned against the window. She was very self-aware and distanced herself from the third prince. Sensing her thoughts, Beligaju faintly met her gaze. You seem to be particularly resistant to this, Highness. Hellion Vivian thought she misheard. No, doesn't your Highness hate being approached? She was abiding by the rules. Beligaju stared at her. After the martial chi competition, you and I will be married. There's nothing wrong with getting used to it in advance. Hellion Vivian smiled. There's no need to get used to it, I'm fine with it. This Highness can't. Beligaju's voice was very indifferent. You also know that this Highness hates being approached. Hellion Vivian was choked by his words. Then, Hellion Vivian was still thinking of a way. Don't say this really was a problem. After becoming husband and wife, who would even stand so far away from each other? It was obvious at a glance that it was fake. The royal was very efficient and decisively cut off her excuse. Come here. What are you doing? Hellion Vivian looked at his slender fingers tapping on the wooden table, slightly puzzled. Beligaju looked at her as if he was looking at an idiot. Getting used to it in advance. How? Hellion Vivian's words abruptly stopped, not for any other reason, because in the next second, she was embraced into a fragrant and floating chest. The slightly cool body temperature, with a strong masculine scent, made Hellion Vivian's body stiffen. As if he didn't notice her reaction, the royal still had a calm expression, as if holding her in his arms was really just to get used to it in advance. Hellion Vivian felt that this kind of stiff muscles was too uncomfortable, so she simply relaxed her arms with a clear conscience. She raised an eyebrow and said, "Can this be tolerated? It's within the acceptable range." The royal's tone was very light, so light that Hellion Vivian felt that she actually felt guilty. It seemed that she shouldn't have doubted the man's intentions just now. He should really not be used to being close to others. No wonder he would rather have his wound hurt than let the servants bandage it. As soon as she came in, he frowned. He probably didn't like people standing in his territory. She had been in contact with people with mysophobia before. They looked at everyone as germs. It was really difficult for the royal to hold a huge germ like her. Hellion Vivian thought of this, and her posture became more relaxed. She lazily yawned and said in a daze, "Then tell me when you can't stand it, and I'll push you away." Okay. Beligaju reached out and hugged her a little tighter. The softness in his arms made his thin lips curl, and the air of evilness rushed to his face. Oh, she was so easily hooked. It could be seen that this little thing still cared about him. Fire Qilin, who came to watch, silently turned its head. This liar who didn't even blink when he lied was really its master? However, it wasn't wrong to think about it. His Highness' principle of treating his prey was to use all means possible, but when it came to patience, this seemed to be the first time. But it was obvious that Hellion Vivian's attention to other men made His Highness lose this patience. Chapter 209. Why aren't you continuing? Beligaju stopped what he was doing, as if he was smiling, but there wasn't the slightest trace of a smile in his eyes. Even though Hellion Vivian felt that she didn't handle this matter properly, but what she had to say, she still had to say. Your Highness, we made a contract. It says that we should help each other, not restrain each other. Beligaju didn't look at her, as if he didn't care about what she said, but also as if he was a little absent-minded. He didn't even notice that the hot tea in his hand had spilled out. He only said with a cold voice, "You mean to say that even if you want to see Heizei, I can't do anything about it?" No. Hellion Vivian saw that his hot tea was about to stain the wound on his palm. She reached out and held his left hand, moving it to the side, and said again, "I just feel that we can't affect each other's freedom. If your Highness wants to see a woman today, and I say that I don't want your Highness to go, your Highness will definitely feel uncomfortable. After all, you won't." Without waiting for Hellion Vivian to finish speaking, Beligaju faintly interrupted her, and said with a clear and cold tone, "I know who I'm going to marry." In other words, you don't know who you're going to marry. Being said like this by a man, Hellion Vivian actually felt a bit guilty. Logically speaking, it was indeed a taboo for a normal couple. Have you ever thought about what the consequences would be if you lost your reputation before the martial chi test? Beligaju's voice didn't seem to have changed, but the clouds outside suddenly thickened by a layer. The originally light breeze suddenly became more than twice as strong, sweeping past her ears, like 10 armies and 10,000 horses trampling on withered leaves. It was a bit scary. The consequences would be that you can't marry into the imperial family for the rest of your life. Hellion Vivian was just about to open her mouth when she heard him continue. This Highness will not allow anyone to break the contract between you and this Highness. If you insist on seeing him, then this Highness can only take action and help the Hay family take care of their second young master. Hellion Vivian's eyes darkened. She had never thought that things would develop like this. Only now did she clearly understand what people meant by the royal family's methods. For a long time he had been indifferent, even elegant to the point of indifference. So much so that she forgot how ruthless he was when he hunted her down. As for the royal family, as long as you didn't touch his reverse scale, everything would be fine. If you ruined his plan, he wouldn't mind showing you what he was capable of. It was only because in this game she was just a chess piece, so it was natural for him to care about her reputation. Hellion Vivian smiled and raised her head to reply, "I know." Then she sat back down in her original seat, polite but distant. A cooperation should look like a cooperation. Although the royal family's words were a bit heartless, it was the truth. It was just that Hellion Wei had an alarm in her heart. She would never be anyone's chess piece. This game was started by her, so she should be the one to end it. From now on, she had to carefully plan how to escape unscathed, because she realized that the partner she had chosen was really more dangerous than she had imagined. If she wasn't careful, there might be a bottomless abyss in front of her. Hellion Vivian liked to work with this kind of person. That would make everything easier. However, at the same time, Hellion Vivian also knew that she had to be careful in the future. In this game, not only did they have to work together to deal with each other, they also had to maintain their distance. Having encountered such a well-matched opponent, Hellion Wei felt that her whole body was filled with vigor. She even thought that in the future, when everything was settled, she would wander to the ends of the world and look for Bailey Jiaju to fight. As for now, it was better to be clear about her position. As for He Eyes, she could only make an appointment at the academy. Baligaju found that he didn't like her obedience at all. That kind of distance that came from her bones was like a wall, forcibly pushing him a meter away. For a He Eyes, she was like this. Heh. Good, very good. Baligaju narrowed his eyes, his expression proud and lonely. An ice-cold wind blew across his face. She was just a prey that he liked more. He slowly clenched his hand. Although he was mocking her in his heart, he couldn't help but tighten his grip on the scroll. The atmosphere in the carriage seemed to have frozen. When Eunuch Sun opened the curtain, he saw this scene. He was hesitating whether or not to shrink back. Baligaju raised his eyes to look at him, then lazily leaned back. He casually untied his robe with one hand and casually put the other hand on the side. What is it? Something was wrong. Eunuch Sun understood His Highness. The worse his mood was, the more he would be like this. Strange, according to what they said, His Highness was in a good mood the whole way. He even asked for some tea and snacks, saying that it was for someone to eat. How did it become like this now? Eunuch Sun held the tray in his hands. He thought for a moment and said, "Your Highness, do you want to eat this osmanthus cake with tea? Or this old servant will go get some candied fruits for you." "No need." Baligaju's deep voice floated over with the sound of rain. "No one is eating it anymore." Hearing this, Eunuch Sun felt more and more that something was wrong. He looked at Hellion Vivian and gave her a meaningful look. Hellion Vivian reached out and brought the wooden tray over. She put it in Baligaju's hand. After thinking for a moment, she said, "Eat more, Your Highness' hand will heal faster." The wind outside seemed to be a bit weaker. Bailey Jiaju glanced at her and did not refuse. He only used his eyes to glance at his left hand, and then at her face. After serving Baligaju for so many years, Eunuch Sun understood His Highness the most. Seeing this scene, he quickly said, "Eldest Miss, it is inconvenient for His Highness to eat with his hand. This old servant's hand is also dirty. I ask the eldest miss to help this old servant persuade His Highness to eat a few more pieces." Without waiting for Hellion Vivian to decline, Eunuch Sun retreated from the carriage. Hellion Vivian was still a bit hesitant. On the other side, Bailey Jiaju had already clumsily picked up a piece of pastry with his hand wrapped in a white handkerchief. Probably because the pastry touched his wound, his long eyebrows also wrinkled. The crumbs of the pastry scattered on his gown and rolled to the side of her feet. He appeared to be somewhat embarrassed. Hellion Vivian didn't think much of it. She directly took the other pieces of pastry from the tray and put them in front of his mouth. Just when Hellion Vivian thought that he would dislike her hand, the royal prince opened his mouth. When his thin lips slid across the pastry, he lightly touched her finger. It was a bit cold that was hard to ignore. Hellion Vivian couldn't help but take a step back. Looking at Beligaju's slightly puzzled eyebrows, she felt that she was making a fuss over nothing. Chapter 210. His Highness probably didn't bite her finger on purpose. Although this man's mind was very deep, he didn't seem to think too much about the matters between men and women. According to Hellion Vivian's experience, she felt that this kind of abstinent Prince Charming usually likes soft little white rabbits because it was more fun to bully them. Hellion Vivian wasn't wrong. There were indeed many people who liked that kind of thing. But she had never thought about it. There was a kind of man called Beligaju. He didn't like to bully little white rabbits, but lazy and difficult to tame people like her. The more difficult it was to manipulate, the more Beligaju wanted to break her claws. The wind outside the carriage finally slowed down, and it was very comfortable to blow on the face. Okay, you can eat the rest. It was originally prepared for someone, so Beligaju naturally wouldn't eat too much. What's more, he had never liked to eat these things. Since he had already taken advantage of it, he would stop. The smarter the prey, the more he had to stew the frog in warm water, gradually. As for the other obstacles, Beligaju narrowed his eyes and slid the tip of his tongue over his fingertips. If necessary, he would personally take action. Hellion Vivian at the side didn't know that Beligaju had this idea. Or it could be said that she was a little hungry since just now. She looked at the half-piece of osmanthus cake in her hand, opened her mouth and swallowed it. Her eating posture was elegant, but her small face was still puffed up. The osmanthus cake tasted very good. It wasn't too sweet, and it was made with the best honey. When it melted in the mouth, it was so delicious that Hellion Vivian was very satisfied. Beligaju looked at her and was stunned. This Highness ate that before. Hellion Vivian puffed up her cheeks and looked up, chewing the osmanthus cake in her mouth. Didn't you say that I should eat the rest? Beligaju looked at her indifferently and seemed to be quite helpless. He supported his forehead with his fingers. I was talking about the food on the plate. Forget it, you continue to eat. For some reason, Hellion Vivian felt that the words forget it were an insult to her intelligence. Looking at the small face in front of him, Beligaju's eyes flashed with a smile. He put his finger to his mouth and coughed a few times. Hellion Vivian naturally saw that he was making fun of her, and suddenly felt a little depressed. Thinking about it, she was usually very smart, but why did she always feel that her brain was not enough in front of this man? Go ahead and laugh if you want to. Hellion Weiwei leaned back and curled her lips. That kind of vexed little action was very small, but it was clearly caught by the black-bellied His Highness. He thought, in fact, this prey has a weakness. As long as he can hold on, there will be a day when he can directly eat her. He was looking forward to her performance after the wedding. I should be able to use the golden silk prison bed in the palace. She was very suitable to lie on top of it and be slowly invaded by him. That scene would definitely be very beautiful. His prey must be matched with the best things so that he can offend her to his heart's content. Your Highness, the carriage is about to enter the city. Eunuch Sun paid attention to the surroundings. Even if he didn't want to, he had to remind his master through the curtain. In a while, the carriage of the academy students will take a fork in the road and will separate from the carriage entering the city. Do you think it's time for this servant to send eldest young miss back, in case there are too many people talking about it? This time Hellion Weiwei did not wait for Bailey Jiaju to open his mouth. She patted the osmanthus cake off her body and directly lifted the carriage curtain. She smiled faintly and said, Eunuch Sun, please lead the way. I have to go back. Eunuch Sun looked at Beligaju behind her, and saw that his master did not smile coldly. Only then did he nod his head and answer frankly, yes. Beligaju indifferently drank a mouthful of tea. After Hellion Vivian left, he glanced at Aning. Aning naturally understood his master's meaning. He respectfully lowered his eyes and then swept in the direction of Hellion Vivian. To walk back to his own carriage from the third prince's carriage, there was originally a distance between them, but Eunuch Sun was a shrewd person. Along the way, he made arrangements and asked someone to drive Hellion Vivian's carriage in front and behind. This way it was convenient to change. Eunuch Sun lifted the curtain for Hellion Vivian with a smile on his face. This time it's all thanks to the eldest miss. As servants we are worried about His Highness, but we can't understand his thoughts. We can only rely on the eldest miss's help. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows and chuckled. I also can't understand your master's thoughts, but it's right to follow the fur of a tiger. Eunuch Sun suddenly choked. It's not good to compare His Highness to a tiger, right? Hellion Vivian did not look at his reaction and entered the carriage. What's wrong? Beligaju looked at Aning, who came back in less than a quarter of an hour, and raised his beautiful eyebrows. Shadow thought about it for a while, but still decided to recite Hellion Weiwei's words to him. Bailey Jiaju sneered. She's actually smart. So it turned out that she was just coaxing him. He thought that she was being sincere. Such a little thing, she was not afraid of a tiger like him swallowing her. He thought that even she helped him bandage his wound under Eunuch Sun's instructions. His good mood just now had changed, and it made his eyes turn even colder. Follow the fur of a tiger? Who was the real prey between the two of them? It seemed that someone still did not know what to do with her claws. Continued to look at her. Beligaju withdrew his gaze. Shadow, however, was somewhat lost in his own thoughts. He'd also thought that if he told that information to His Highness definitely wouldn't spend so much energy on Weiwei like he did now. To him, there should only be that one person who was special. But Aning could not help but rejoice that there was a person like Hellion Vivian, so His Highness did not have time to listen to other news until now. It's just that Shadow looked at the carriage not too far away and let out a long sigh. If the main character really did come, then Weiwei to His Highness would only be left as a tool to be used. However, no one cared about those minor details anymore, because returning from the Hidden Spirit Temple meant that the martial chi competition that everyone was looking forward to was about to begin. Regardless of whether it was the students of the White Academy or the people of the four great clans, all of them put their attention on this matter, cultivating all day long. Gradually, many experts wearing capes and carrying armaments on the streets gradually appeared in the capital city. All of them came from other places, which was enough to show how big the impact of this test was. What Hellion Weiwei wanted to do was to take advantage of this influence and make a lot of money. The martial chi test was about to begin. Getting a good armament was an urgent matter for every martial artist. And as the boss of Profound Heaven, she naturally would not let go of such a good business opportunity. Besides, it was time to close the net and catch the fish. Chapter 211. Originally, it was very difficult for Hellion Vivian to leave the White Academy in the past. Firstly, she did not have the authority. Secondly, after she was driven out by her family, those teachers had always looked down on her. In addition, her master, Grandmaster Zizun, was not around recently. If she wanted to ask for leave, she even had to write the reason why she wanted to do something. Now it was different. The leave in her hands was won by the Academy's examination. No one would ask where she went and what she did down the mountain. Therefore, after returning to the White Academy again, Hellion Vivian did not go to class unlike ordinary people, which made everyone think that she was shocked. After all, a person who only knew how to do martial arts but did not understand what martial chi was, appearing in class at this time was indeed very awkward. Some people even suspected that Hellion Weiwei simply did not understand the principles that the teacher was talking about. That was why she took the initiative to give up on the lessons during this period of time, so that everyone would not be able to take care of her when they were practicing martial chi. After hearing this news, the Hellion Jiaoer coldly snorted. She is quite self-aware this time. As she spoke, she instructed the servant girl below. In the future, there is no need to inquire about this little bitch anymore. Mother is right, I was too short-sighted in the past. Being serious with an ugly woman like her is simply lowering my own taste. Let her fiddle with her pile of scrap iron in her dreams. No matter how well she does it, she won't be able to sell a single piece, let alone participate in the martial chi competition. Go and see when mother will be back, and help me ask about the current situation of Profound Heaven. Yes. The servant girl saw that her miss was in a good mood, and her attitude also followed suit. Miss wants to get an armament from Profound Heaven before the martial chi competition? The Hellion Jiaoer nodded, that small face with arrogance. Father should have already set up a connection for me. Now I am just waiting for mother to come back. The servant girl took the opportunity to flatter. You are really worthy of being miss. This servant heard that the armament of Profound Heaven is very difficult to get. Few of the young ladies in the capital can get it. Father's connections are naturally not weak. Hellion Jiaoer blew on her freshly dyed red hair and coolly glanced at her. What's more, those people who only rely on their families to get ahead, how can they compare to me? The servant girl smiled, Mrs. Wright. Presumably, the boss of Profound Heavens heard of your reputation in the capital and knew that he had offended you in Armament City. He wanted to give Miss an armament to atone for his crime. You can say that in front of me, but don't say that in front of outsiders. Although Hellion Jiaoer was scolding her, her face was full of pride. The maidservant lowered her eyes. Young miss, don't worry. I know that those people outside are jealous of you. I won't say such words outside. If he were to meet someone like the eldest miss who had evil intentions, what kind of trouble would it cause? It's good that you understand. The Hellion Jiaoer leaned back and reclined on the sandalwood chair. She looked like she had already obtained the Profound Heavens armament. The servant girl smiled again and fawningly handed her a cup of tea. Her every move was subservient. She breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that the young miss had finally returned to normal. During this time, because of the eldest miss, the young miss's mood had never been good. In the end, the ones who suffered were them, the servants. However, the eldest miss was also too much. Why did she like to jump around in front of the young miss so much? Now that something big happened, she was beaten back to her original state. She probably also felt that her martial chi was not good enough, so she found a place to hide. As the servant girl thought, she looked at the Hellion Jiaoer's face. Seeing that she seemed to be asleep, she gently put down the fan in her hand and also took a nap. However, they didn't know that at this moment. Hellion Vivian was sitting on the second floor of Profound Heaven's No. 1 shop. She was dressed in men's clothing and holding a paper umbrella. She stood with her back to the light, making the servant who came to greet her very puzzled. This guest, our steward, is out today. We don't know when he will be back. Would you like to come back another day? The servant who was doing chores was very polite and his tone was gentle. This was the recruitment policy of Profound Heavens. No matter how good the other party was, Hellion Vivian's first rule was to choose a servant who could make the customer feel good. Therefore, the reason why Profound Heaven's business was so good was not without reason. Hellion Vivian turned around and looked at him. Her thin lips slightly curved. I'll wait for a while. The servant was stunned. Obviously, he was stunned by the person in front of him. He had never seen anyone who looked so gorgeous. At this time, Hellion Weiwei had regained her appearance. She was wearing a long robe with a golden border and clouds inlaid with 1-inch wide roses. Her beautiful hair was lazily draped over her ears. Her jet black hair was alluring. She was not dressed very neatly, but her figure was graceful and graceful. Her posture was elegant, her complexion was magnificent, and her aura was like the moon. Under the golden sunset, her straight and slender legs were more beautiful than a model's, especially when her red sleeves floated in the air, and she held a folded umbrella in her hand. The servant thought that he had seen a fairy from the sky. He was a little confused and stood there in a daze. He began to wonder which family this young lady was from. How could she be born with such a bewitching appearance? Yes, although Hellion Vivian was wearing men's clothing. But the shrewd servant still saw her gender, so he was even more confused. He knew a lot of people in the capital, but he had never seen anyone who was more outstanding than this person in front of him. Strangely, he had never seen this person before. No one in the capital had ever mentioned such a person. While the servant was puzzled, he saw the carriages of the 4 stewards appear in front of the shop. The servant was shocked. Usually, only 1 or 2 stewards came to the shop. Why were all 4 stewards here today? Could it be that the second boss was coming? That's not right. The second boss sent a message the day before yesterday, saying that his father had been very strict recently and was forcing him to get married. He disliked that he was always hanging around outside, so he was grounded in the backyard. He said that he would only be released in 2 days. Then what could have happened? For all 4 of the stewards to come. The servant thought for a moment. He could no longer care about the guests behind him. He quickly tidied his collar and hurriedly ran downstairs. Unexpectedly, before he could speak, Steward Zhang asked him, "Is someone looking for this old man today?" "Yes." The servant quickly responded and followed Steward Zhang to look around. "Where is that person?" Strangely, Steward Zhang, who had always been calm, sounded a little anxious. The servant pointed upstairs. "That guest is still waiting in the private room on the 2nd floor. On the 2nd floor? Steward Zhang clenched his teeth. "Why did you arrange for him to be on the 2nd floor? Chapter 212. The servant thought to himself, "It wasn't me who arranged this. It was that person who entered the building as if it was her own home. She entered the private room as if she was familiar with the place. She knew the layout better than him. The 2nd floor it is." Manager Zhang lifted his robe and hurriedly walked upstairs. As he walked, he said, "Go and bring me the best armament parts and the accounts of the store for the past 2 days. The servant exclaimed, "Look at it now? Look at it now." As Manager Zhang spoke, he had already pushed open the door. After seeing that familiar figure, he smiled with relief. "Big boss, you're finally here." "Big boss?" The servant looked up in shock. His eyes flashed with unconcealable astonishment. This person turned out to be the elusive big boss of Profound Heaven. The servant obviously didn't dare to believe it. He glanced at Hellion Vivian again. Wait a minute, he needed time to cool down. Their big boss wasn't a man, wasn't a mighty and majestic man. Instead, it was a young girl who looked less than 20 years old. What happened to the back of a tiger and the waist of a bear? What happened to the white-haired old man? What happened to the reclusive master? What happened to the man who had never shown his face because of his ugly appearance? Their big boss clearly only relied on her face to win against many people. Uncle Zhang. Hellion Vivian smiled. She reached out and shook hands with Manager Zhang. Then she glanced at the servant. The servant was dazed. He thought that this voice was also very pleasant to hear. Manager Zhang slapped the back of the servant's head. "Why are you still in a daze? Hurry up and prepare the things I just asked you to bring." After he finished speaking, he smiled at Hellion Vivian. "This is this old servant's new disciple. He just entered the store and is not familiar with it." Hellion Vivian smiled. "Very good. We can hang him in the store as a mascot." The servant suddenly felt like he was in a dream. Was he just praised by his idol? No, after getting the accounts, he must go downstairs and run a few laps. Steward Zhang looked at his own subordinate going downstairs foolishly, helplessly shook his head and said to Hellion Wei Wei, as soon as this old servant received the boss's letter, this old servant rushed back from outside. "Only, I don't know what the boss meant by making a profit?" "Old Zhang, that's enough. Our brothers haven't all arrived yet and you want to trick the boss into giving you lessons." The burly manager Wei walked up. Wei Wei saw that all of her capable subordinates had arrived. Only then did she put away the umbrella in her hand, her eyes shining. "You should all know that the armaments test is about to begin. Compared to other armaments, our business is indeed not bad. However, compared to what I expected, it's still a bit worse. That's why, starting today, we need to change our business philosophy. From now on, the only thing we need to do is to build momentum." Build momentum? Steward Wei was a little confused. Profound Heavens is currently flourishing. Those people are squeezing their heads and trying to order an armament from our guild. Who in the entire capital city doesn't know about Profound Heavens? They are no different from country bumpkins. Hellion Vivian put down the umbrella in her hand. Although the action was light, because of the excellent armament, it changed the surrounding airflow. This is not enough. This is not enough? Manager Wei stared and turned to look at Manager Zhang. Even the calm and steady Manager Zhang couldn't understand Hellion Vivian's meaning. He could only wait for Hellion Vivian's next words. Hellion Vivian's slender fingers tapped on the table. When she looked up, the sun was setting. Outside the large French windows, it was as if the entire evening had become her foil. Her eyes flashed with a burning light. The harder it is to obtain something, the more precious it is. Let's spread our brand. From today onwards, stop all armaments production. Tell them that in the next few days, Profound Heavens will only sell 5 armaments. We will implement a membership gold card system. We will sell armaments in the form of an auction. Every day, the auction house will only invite 100 gold card members to participate in the auction. If you want to see it, you can come and visit. But there's one thing, you have to reserve the location in advance. This approach is a bit too bold. Manager Wei was tongue-tied. He had never thought that doing business could be done this way. After all, when they opened the shop, Big Boss had told them that everything should be based on the customer's feelings. Now it seemed like it was the other way around. Was it possible for those high-ranking officials and nobles to curry favor with them? What's more, those people were not only rich merchants but also first-ranking officials. Would they accept this approach? However, Manager Wei had to admit that once this approach was successful, they would completely break through the current stage and truly enjoy the same treatment as the century-old aristocratic family shop. This made him feel excited no matter how he thought about it. Hellion Vivian glanced at him and smiled evilly. Where we come from, there's a term called private customization. There's also a term called limited release. Manager Wei, you have to remember that the so-called private customization and limited release only mean one thing. Some people need these things to show their worth. It's not for anything else, but to let everyone know that they have something that no one else in this world can have. So there's no problem at all. Taking advantage of this opportunity will make a good profit. At that moment, Manager Wei felt that the young lady in front of him didn't seem like a businesswoman. Her mouth carried an evil aura that ordinary women didn't have. It was like a raging fire that easily made people think of a battlefield. She was like a queen standing behind the scenes, arranging and scheming, commanding the troops. This time, the capital's business circle would probably be reshuffled again. When Profound Heavens limited edition armaments were launched, it attracted the attention of all the big circles in the capital. Just like what Hellion Vivian said, one of a kind, this kind of symbol of status was very eye-catching. Adding on the fact that the armaments test was approaching, everyone was very curious about the auction that would be held the day after tomorrow. Even those who didn't need armaments also wanted to see the elegance of the limited edition armaments. It could be said that they had no regrets in life. Even the retired emperor, who had always been experienced and knowledgeable, was alarmed. He sent people to Profound Heaven to reserve a seat for the auction, preparing to personally see the legendary armaments. Big Boss, is this okay? Manager Zhang took out a pure silver card and gave it to Hellion Vivian. Hellion Vivian took it and looked at it. Her beautiful fingers twirled around and the corners of her mouth slightly curved. Not bad. When you give it to everyone, make sure that it's real money. Tell them that here identity and whatnot are of no use. Yes. Manager Zhang slightly lowered his head. To be honest, he completely didn't think that this kind of card would be bought by people. But the situation was beyond his imagination. Now, the whole capital was talking about the silver card. In their eyes, this kind of silver card had already become a symbol of noble status. Chapter 213. It was night and the moonlight was getting darker. Outside the window, one could see the mountains and trees. The steward of the general's residence was holding a lantern outside the door in the middle of the night. He looked left and right as if he was waiting for someone, looking very mysterious. When he saw the carriage coming, he hurriedly held the lantern and went up to it. "Madam." It turned out that the person who rushed back in the middle of the night was none other than Su Yanmo, who was ordered by the retired emperor to stay in the Hidden Spirit Temple to abstain from meat and pray. This trip to the Hidden Spirit Temple not only caused her to lose a maidservant for no reason, but she also lost 70 to 80% of her face. If it weren't for her husband's family having a say in the imperial court, she really would have stayed in the Hidden Spirit Temple for 10 days to half a month. But even if it was only 3 days, it was enough to make Su Yanmo vomit a ball of anger in her heart. She glanced at the steward coldly. "What about the thing I asked you to do?" "Don't worry, madam. I have already made arrangements. Recently, Profound Heavens is doing some kind of VIP card distribution. I have already made an appointment with the steward there. Tomorrow Madam will be able to bring Miss there. You will definitely be able to buy a good armament. The steward held the lantern for Su Yenmo while waiting at her beck and call. Su Yenmo nodded in satisfaction and said, "What has that little bastard been doing recently? Eldest Miss doesn't have the slightest bit of martial chi in her body. Recently, White Academy's courses are all related to martial chi. She probably couldn't stay any longer and asked for leave." The steward reported word for word the news he received from the courtyard. Su Yenmo smiled, her face showing her natural arrogance. "All right, you can leave. We will go to Profound Heavens first thing in the morning tomorrow." After so many years of flattery, she knew that little bastard better than anyone else. She felt inferior, yet she wanted to stand out. Now she finally knew what she was worth. After this martial chi test, that little bastard would understand that she and her beloved daughter were not on the same level at all. She was originally a good-for-nothing, and when her name was removed from the family, she left so vigorously. At that time she would still have to come back like a beggar without a single redeeming feature and beg for a living. Su Yenmo thought of the future scene and the smile on the corner of her mouth became wider. One should not be so naive. She was so muddle-headed that she had even forgotten who she was, yet she still dared to provoke her. Sooner or later, that little bastard would kneel on the ground and lick her feet. She was not in a hurry. This was just the beginning. At night, the crescent moon hung in the sky. In the extremely luxurious palace, there were layers of white gauze curtains. A huge and incomparably luxurious golden cage was placed in the middle of the bedroom. Beside the cage was a pool of clear water. Inside the cage was a large carved bed made of pure wood. There was something like a bracelet hanging on the bed. That thing was made of pure gold, with intricate patterns on it. It looked exquisite and enchanting, just enough to buckle one's wrist. The side of the bracelet that was close to the skin was inlaid with a layer of rabbit fur, soft and comfortable, and would not hurt when worn. Further inside there was a dazzling golden piece. A person was lying on the soft bed, his white brocade robe swaying gently in the wind. His picturesque side face was covered with a layer of brilliance. He held an ancient scroll in one hand and supported his head lazily, as if he was very satisfied with this newly made golden cage. The corner of his mouth had a faint smile. His charm was not diminished by the luxurious golden light in the room. On the contrary, he was elegant and charming, taking the full advantage of the romantic. Nangong Lai, who was sitting opposite him, shuddered when he saw his smile. "Aju, are you really going to sleep here in the future?" "Yes," Beligaju responded unhurriedly. Nangong Lai swallowed a mouthful of tea. "Don't you think this thing is too eye-catching? Making a pure gold cage as a bed, only he could think of it." Beligaju slowly turned a page of the ancient scroll in his hand. "I don't think so." Nangong Lai was speechless. "The point is, what do you want to do with this thing? Don't tell me you really want to lock Hellion Vivian up?" Nangong Lai used to think that he was just joking. Beligaju glanced at him. "What does this have to do with you?" "I'm just curious." Nangong Lai was mentally and physically exhausted. "Most people don't want to be locked up. Aju, you have to understand, no matter how interesting she is in your eyes, it's the same. When she sees this kind of thing, she will definitely run away." The word escape made the light in Bailey Jiaju's eyes turn cold. He slightly stood up, one elbow propped on the chair under his body, the other arm casually rested on his bent knee. It was obviously a languid posture, but when he did it, it interpreted extreme danger. She won't have that chance. Listening to the movements in the room, the eunuch outside the door had already poked his head in to look many times. He probably wanted to ask when Beligaju was going to take a bath, but he didn't dare to come in. Finally, Beligaju put the scroll beside the pillow and stood up. The servant at the side immediately stepped forward to help him put on his boots. He was dressed in a moon-white rose robe with a large fur coat made of fiery red fox skin draped over it. Just as he was about to change into the White Academy's uniform, he saw a dark shadow pass by and respectfully kneel on the ground. "Your Highness, we have lost track of the person." Beligaju's slender fingers paused and looked towards the shadow. His dark eyes became more and more cold like ice. "Lost her? Miss Hellion seemed to be preparing to meet someone and only discovered us halfway. After that, she threw off all of our shadows. Shadow hung his head down heavily. Beligaju didn't speak. His white hand threw away the robe. The light outside the window hit his bare waist and spread a thin layer of red. It made him look like a precious ivory sculpture that should be stored in the innermost part of a museum. It was very low-key and luxurious. Nangong Lai analyzed. She must have gone to meet someone important. Otherwise, she wouldn't have thrown them off. Could it be that she went to see Heizei? Aju, did you notice that when we were competing, she and Heizei were acting strangely? Crack. Not waiting for Nangong Lai to finish speaking. The teacup he was holding seemed to be shattered by some invisible force. Nangong Lai opened his mouth and stared blankly. His face was a mess. The tea slid down the side of his face and dripped onto the table. He subconsciously looked toward Bailey Jiaju, only to see that man, who had always been expressionless, punch the wall with the side of his fist. His knuckles overflowed with blood, but he was completely unaware of it. There was still a smile on the corner of his mouth. The wall was full of cracks with uneven lines. A cool breeze swept past, rolling up his ink-black hair like silk. The surrounding space was so cold that it was somewhat inconceivable. Nangong Lai looked at this scene and slightly narrowed his eyes. So intense, not like his style at all. Chapter 214. The night grew darker. Hellion Vivian, who everyone thought was hiding because she was afraid of losing face, had already finished the last armament. She reached out and pressed her neck, turning left and right handsomely. Then, looking at the 5 dazzling armaments on the table, she lazily smiled. Where's Heizei? He's not here yet? Young Master was locked up by Master. I'm afraid he won't be able to come out for the next few days. Manager Zhang marveled at the exquisiteness of those armaments. His eyes were filled with emotion. Holding a magnifying glass in his hand, he looked at them from beginning to end. Hellion Vivian smiled and sat down on the wooden chair. Immediately, someone handed her tea. Hellion Vivian thanked the servant, then asked, "Hasn't he been quite well behaved recently? Why does Master He still dislike him?" It seems that because he did something, the royal family sent people to investigate. Manager Zhang didn't take this matter to heart. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. She didn't know that a certain highness would find trouble with Heizei. In the future, she would find time to properly talk to a certain highness. He was an ally, so he couldn't casually use a knife. There's still 4 more hours until daybreak. You all should go to sleep. Hellion Vivian put down the teacup in her hand. As if she thought of something, she said, "Oh right, leave 3 spots for me." Manager Zhang frowned. 3 spots? Miss still doesn't want to announce your boss's identity. It's not time yet. Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips. However, it's still okay to properly enjoy the privilege. When the time comes, I'll bring my friend over. Manager Zhang's face lit up. Miss Friend? Which family's young master, or is it Miss? It's not some young master, right? Hellion Wei lazily yawned. I'm not sure about that person's family background, but his appearance is very attractive. If in the future he's the spokesperson for our martial arts academy, money will definitely drop like a crashing crash. Manager Zhang felt that he didn't understand the big boss's words. Endorsement? Just take our armaments and go out to fight. Hellion Vivian recalled the scene of her deskmate instantly killing the Yuan family's young master in White Academy, and the smile on the corner of her mouth became even wider. He's the kind of person who can control any kind of martial cultivator. When Manager Zhang heard this, his face was filled with astonishment. What kind of martial cultivator can control it? Did such a person still exist in the War Dragon Empire? Logically speaking, martial cultivators and martial artists' martial chi complemented each other. How could there be someone who could control any martial cultivator? Manager Zhang scratched his head. Hellion Vivian was already asleep. Her body was leaning against a wooden chair in a lazy posture. Her long hair fluttered on the golden-colored carpet. Coupled with the fact that she was wearing men's clothing, she really looked like an exquisite and beautiful young man who had walked out of a manga. How could he fall asleep like this? Steward Zhang shook his head, glanced at the servant beside him, and made a shushing gesture. The miss was undoubtedly the most tired today. From the design of the cards to the assembly of the martial cultivators, it was all done by her alone. She didn't even eat a few bites of dinner. She was always busy and busy. Now that she finally had some free time, Manager Zhang didn't disturb her anymore. He retreated with the servant and gave a few instructions to the people below. Manager Zhang looked at the brightly lit auction house. Everywhere was filled with luxury. Every seat here needed to be reserved. The seats at the back cost 10,000 taels, not to mention what kind of status the people sitting in the front row had. This kind of model was unprecedented. In other words, their boss had created another miracle. Only, who would have thought that this miracle was created by the young girl who everyone thought was a good-for-nothing until now? The next day, the capital was in an uproar. Originally, the martial chi competition was about to begin. These 8 big alleys were already filled with people coming and going. Now, because of the martial cultivator auction, it attracted countless martial artists. Some people said that this auction was not the slightest bit inferior to young Master Wu Shuang's auction of martial cultivators. Therefore, in this group of people, not only were there high officials and nobles who wanted to broaden their horizons, there were also various masters in the martial cultivator world. Of course, there were also masters who didn't like the younger generation of profound heavens. After all, they were all at that age and had prestige in the capital. This little brat came, wasn't he provoking them? No matter from which perspective, Profound Heavens was creating a first-class spectacle. For the sake of participating in this auction, Helian Jiaoer specially wore a light purple long skirt. The cuffs were embroidered with the same color decorative designs. Silver threads hooked out several pieces of auspicious clouds with tassels. Her hair was wrapped in a pure white gauze, contrasting with her even more elegant and beautiful appearance. As soon as she got off the carriage, quite a few people turned to look in her direction. It was a pity that beauties always liked to be half-covered, so that they would be more charming. Unfortunately, they wanted to make people unable to see their appearance clearly. Her hand gently held Madame Su's arm, and she stood at the side like a small and delicate person, watching Madame Su greet the high officials and nobles who passed by. Those people also wanted to curry favor with Madame Su, so they didn't mention the part where she was locked up in the temple. Instead, they chatted about all kinds of things, wanting to sit closer to Madame Su. Therefore, there was no lack of people who wanted to curry favor with her. She pulled Madame Su's hand and said, "Sister, you're finally here. I heard some time ago that your family has a good relationship with the boss of Profound Heavens. I'm relying on sister to arrange a good seat." "It's just through letters," Madame Su said modestly, but her heart was full of pride. She smiled gently and said, "Sister, you also know that I'm not in the capital these days. I can help you arrange a good seat." That person laughed. "What did I say? Sister Mo is the one with the ability. Okay, let's go in early. The sun outside is scary. My girl's skin has been delicate since she was young. She can't stand the sun." Madame Su finished speaking and shook her head, but with a subtle sense of superiority. Hearing this, everyone looked at the Helian Jiaoer. "This is Jiaoer, right? She's really a beauty that can cause the downfall of a city. She's a beauty that can captivate birds and beasts. How can you say that people can't be compared? My girl stays in the house all day long, and she's cultivating in the academy. After cultivating for so long, she still doesn't have a bit of martial chi. Look at Jiaoer. Not only is she beautiful, she's also a genius. I think that this time she'll surprise everyone again. I heard that there are martial artists from Cloudfall Nation who came specifically for Jiaoer, wanting to compete with her. Even people from Cloudfall Nation know about Jiaoer's fame? That's really not simple." "That's right, I heard that it was Master Wu Shuang who brought them. One is a prince from a neighboring country, and the other is a princess from a neighboring country. They both want to see Jiaoer's face." Chapter 215. I think that whatever princess is jealous. Someone laughed and intimately pinched the Helian Jiaoer's face. "Look at you, how did you give birth to such a beautiful face? You're going to outshine all the women in the world." "Auntie Chun, you're making fun of Jiaoer again." The Helian Jiaoer shyly lowered her eyes, but the corners of her mouth revealed a complacent smile. The maid standing next to the Helian Jiaoer also spoke without restraint. "Young miss, you're too kind and too modest. You're obviously the most beautiful." Unexpectedly, as soon as her voice fell, a person walked over from not far away. That person seemed to have just woken up. Her jade-like green left hand held a bamboo umbrella, and under the umbrella was a person wearing a red feathered gown. She walked very lazily, and her long calves were casually exposed. Her long silk-like hair hung unbound on both sides, dark and curly. She had a snow-white oval face without much makeup. Her lips were light and very beautiful, but there was a bright red mole at the corner of her mouth. The knurled gown complemented her snow-white skin. Her eyes were bright and slender, and the corners of her eyes were raised. Her curly hair fell to the side of her ears, and the corner of her mouth had a charming smile. The red gown made this laziness even more stunning. Although the gown was for men because the person wearing it was too lazy to the bone, and the immortal aura was otherworldly, people could tell at a glance that it was a woman. At that moment, almost everyone sucked in a breath of air. Their eyes didn't turn as they stared at the fairy that appeared out of thin air. Their faces were filled with unprecedented surprise. That person seemed to not notice the gazes around her as she held the umbrella and casually looked at them. The Hellion Jiaoer clenched her hands. She was naturally unhappy that such an uninvited guest stole everyone's attention. When she saw the face clearly, she was even more so. "Isn't this that village girl?" the maid blurted out, causing Madame Su to look over. "What village girl?" Madame Su looked at the figure in the distance and felt that it was strangely familiar. But when did such a young girl of the same age as her beloved daughter appear in the capital? Why didn't she know at all? Seeing that her miss didn't say anything, the maidservant said, "It's the fairy that was talked about in the capital some time ago." Madame Su was in the general's residence at that time, so she was naturally affected by this rumor. She had never taken this matter to heart before. After all, she had meticulously raised Jiaoer since she was a child. Whether it was the hair cream or the rouge, they were all made of ready-made pearls. She wanted her to grow up into a beauty that no one could compare to. How many times had she entered the palace? How many daughters had she seen? None of them were as outstanding as her Jiaoer. Naturally, she would not believe the rumors that were circulating in the alleyways. But now, it seemed that there really was something in the capital that she didn't know. Madame Su wrinkled her eyebrows. She didn't like this feeling of being out of her control. But even so, she knew what to say in this matter so that her beloved daughter wouldn't be compared. Nowadays, these girls don't know the rules. With that kind of dress, where did they come from? It's a debate. In the future, when you see this kind of person, take the miss and stay away, do you understand? Although Madame Su's mouth was scolding the servant girl, in fact, she wanted to express that the woman's origin was unknown. She didn't know where this seductive woman came from, but she couldn't even be compared to her family's Jiaoer. When the crowd heard this, they followed one after another. Just don't know which ignorant person's soul has been seduced. It's still Jiaoer who looks. That person originally wanted to say good-looking, but felt that this statement was too hypocritical. Abruptly, she changed it to pure. Hellion Jiaoer's face was still smiling, but her heart had long since lost the good mood from before. She waited until there was no one else around before she pulled the servant girl over. She used some strength in her fingers and said, "You go and find out for me who that person is. How did he appear here? She's also wearing a robe that looks good." "Yes." The maidservant trembled as she responded. Not for anything else, but because of Hellion Jiaoer's twisted little face. No one had seen the true appearance of the most talented woman in the capital. Only she knew that no matter how cute a person was, when her expression was sinister, it was really frightening. This servant will go and follow her. Wait a moment. Hellion Jiaoer called her back. Go and ask her what she does. If she's just a lowly wench in the red light district, then give her a sum of money and let her stay far away from the capital. Hellion Jiaoer had been surrounded by stars for a long time. She simply couldn't tolerate anyone who was prettier than her. Previously, when they met for the first time, Hellion Jiaoer didn't feel much threat because at that time, her dressing was so unsophisticated that it could drop dregs. She only relied on her good looks, skin and figure. Right now, Hellion Jiaoer clearly and distinctly felt that in front of that person she had fallen by a large step. No, she must make her disappear. Or, before she leaves, make her tell you the secret to whitening her skin. Hellion Jiaoer's eyes were filled with poison. Ask her what she eats on a daily basis. The maidservant cautiously asked, "What if she doesn't say?" "Then tell her who paid for it." Helian Jiao raised her chin and laughed coldly. It's very easy for the general's residence to make someone die quietly. The maidservant felt a chill run down her back and hurriedly responded, yes. Then she hurriedly chased in the direction Helian Vivian had just left. It had to be said that Helian Jiao was ruined by her own arrogance. If she hadn't looked down on Helian Vivian before, she wouldn't have failed to recognize the umbrella in Helian Vivian's hand, because that wasn't an umbrella at all. Rather, it was the armament that Wei Wei won at Armament City at that time. However, in order to make it more practical, Helian Vivian had made a few small adjustments later on, so that it had a function that no other armament had. Invisibility. As long as it reached the right temperature and wind direction, this umbrella could automatically create a false airflow, hiding Helian Vivian who was holding it. However, its external appearance hadn't changed much. That was why Helian Jiao had been too careless, because in her heart, Helian Vivian would always be the ugliest of the ugliest. Helian Vivian had originally wanted to change her clothes first, then paint her face and go to the academy to find those two guys. She wanted to invite them out to watch the armament auction. In the end, just as she turned a corner, she discovered that there was still a small tail that she hadn't shaken off. Only, this small tail was clearly inferior to the previous person, and didn't even know how to hide his presence. Helian Vivian turned sideways, and her ankle suddenly turned. Chapter 216. The surrounding wind seemed to have a sense of reality as it blew her hair. Her robes fluttered in the wind. Her beauty was peerless. The servant girl didn't expect her to suddenly turn around. She was startled at first, but then she straightened her back. She was clearly young, but she had learned her master's arrogance by 70 to 80%. Woman, isn't this the servant girl of that younger sister of yours who wants to frame you all day long? Why is she following you? Yuan Ming lazily smiled in the Xianhuan space. Helian Vivian didn't speak. She held the umbrella in her hand, and the cherry blossoms fell. It was a beautiful scene. This made the servant girl feel very uncomfortable, but she didn't forget her young miss's order. She took a step forward and said to Helian Vivian, "Young miss, which brothel do you belong to?" "Which brothel?" Helian Vivian repeated this sentence, and a cold light flashed through her eyes. Unfortunately, the servant girl didn't realize it. Or it could be said that she was used to acting like a tyrant by Helian Jiao's side. She didn't care about the flowers and plants outside, not to mention a prostitute who only had looks. "If you don't want to say, I won't force you." The servant girl put on airs. "I have a banknote worth 10,000 taels. My young miss said that as long as you tell us the secret of how to maintain your skin, this banknote will be yours." So someone came to buy you. Woman, I didn't expect you to be so popular." Yuan Ming smiled evilly at the side. Helian Vivian glanced at the banknote. 10,000 taels? The servant girl thought that she had never seen so much money before. She continued to raise her chin. "That's right." But what she didn't expect was that the other party actually laughed lightly. That laughter seemed to have a little bit of playfulness. 10,000 taels is such a small amount of money. Your young miss can take it out. It's enough to buy a servant girl like you. You. The servant girl was angry. She thought that such a wild woman dared to challenge her, a head servant who came from the general's residence. She immediately sneered. "Do you know who I am? You really want to do this the hard way." Helian Weiwei casually glanced at her and allowed her to yell at her side, as if she simply didn't put her in her eyes. Compared to Helian Vivian's faint smile, the maid's warning did not have any effect. Instead, it became unnecessary noise. When the maidservant saw this, she didn't care about anything else and scolded. "Do you really think you're so valuable? You're just a whore. I'm talking to you. Can't you hear me?" Helian Vivian looked at her. Suddenly, she tilted her head and smiled. Then there was a slap. A slap landed on his face. The maidservant was shocked and covered her face in disbelief. She was so angry that her face was distorted. She glared fiercely and screamed, "You dare to hit me, you dare to hit me. You bitch." "Pa." Helian Vivian raised her hand again. Her smile was cold and charming. "So what if I hit you? You. I'm going to kill you." The maidservant completely lost her mind. She bared her fangs and brandished her claws at Hellion Vivian. She looked like she wouldn't give up until she beat her to death. Hellion Wei Wei merely smiled. That gloomy and cold aura that she had been concealing started to emit without restraint. Her pair of bright and beautiful eyes were gradually dyed with frost. Suddenly her finger moved like a dancing butterfly, drawing a curved line that cut through the air. Shwa! The sharp end was firmly pressed against the maidservant's neck. Her movements were so fast that the maidservant didn't have time to react. When she came back to her senses, there was a small cut on her neck. As long as I use a little bit of force, your artery will be cut open. Hellion Vivian held the umbrella in one hand and the silver knife against the maidservant's neck with the other. The wind blew and lifted her long hair. She smiled like a demon. When the time comes, it won't be as simple as your face hurting. Your blood will spurt out and get everywhere. Hey, do you want to try? You can say bitch again. I promise you will die a happy death. The maidservant no longer dared to clamor. Her legs had already begun to tremble, and her face was almost blood red. Her entire body sank into extreme fear, and all of a sudden she went limp on the ground. Hellion Wei Wei looked at her absent-mindedly. Her slender fingers slowly tore the banknote into shreds. Go back and tell your family's young miss, this lord was born beautiful. Even if she wanted to learn, she couldn't. As for the money, don't think that just because the Hellion Jiaoer is rich and powerful, she can do whatever she wants. Teach your maidservants well so that they don't get slapped in the face every day. The flying shredded paper fell. The maidservant watched as the beautiful figure walked further and further away. When her fingers touched the blood on her neck, she was scared out of her wits. She didn't expect this woman to be so powerful. Just now, she didn't even use martial qi, but she suppressed her to the point that she couldn't move at all. But as the Hellion Jiaoer's personal maidservant, she had martial qi and was about to cultivate to the fire level. But she couldn't even beat a person without martial qi. This woman, who is she? The maidservant's face was pale. She ran all the way through the long alley. Her fingers were covering her neck, and she didn't dare to let go. Young Mississippi Hellion Jiaoer turned her head and saw that it was her personal maid who was in this state. Her clothes were even stained with blood. While no one was paying attention, she hurriedly pulled her to the side and frowned. What's going on? The maidservant reported what happened just now to Hellion Jiaoer without missing a word. Her face was ferocious. This servant has never seen such an ungrateful woman. Hellion Jiaoer didn't say anything. She was so angry that her lungs were about to explode. She endured and endured, but in the end she couldn't hold back anymore. She kicked the maidservant's heart hard. Useless thing. The maidservant was already injured. After being kicked like this, her whole body was lying on the ground. Her qi and blood were churning. The pain in her whole body was simply indescribable. However, no one would be able to see this scene. When Hellion Jiaoer turned around, she had already recovered her usual charming and innocent appearance. She walked into the crowd like a well-bred young lady with outstanding conduct. In her heart, there were no less than 100 thoughts of finding that slut and cutting her into pieces. Her eyes were filled with unconcealable jealousy. As a mother, naturally Madame Su had long since seen these things. She sent someone to first drag that servant girl away, then walked over and patted Hellion Jiaoer's hand, saying, "How many times have I told you? Nothing else is important. What's important is the results of this time's armament test. Why do you care about a country bumpkin? Just wait, in a moment when the auction starts, these people will know that only you are worthy of being the center of attention." Chapter 217. Jiaoer understands everything mother said. But that little bitch is so arrogant. Hellion Jiaoer clenched both of her hands. A malevolent expression appeared on her face. Isn't it just a good-looking face? Just wait and see when I'll scratch up that slut's face. Su Yanemo pulled her over, looked at her left and right, pinched her and said, "Jiaoer, how many times have I told you? You have to watch your words and actions. You are the most favored lady of the defense division, the apple of your father's eye, and the future master of the Eastern Palace. So many pairs of eyes are watching you, hoping to find the slightest mistake, even more so now. You have to remember, even if you are angry, don't show it in front of others, understand?" Hellion Jiaoer also knew that her face didn't look too good, But she was still angry in her heart, yet she didn't dare to disobey her mother's words. She shook Madame Sue's arm and acted like a spoiled child as she stuck her face close to her. Daughter understands. Madame Sue stroked her beloved daughter's long hair, her eyes shining. You don't have to be so calculative about that person's appearance. Isn't she just a village girl? Tomorrow find a few people to find out her name and ruin her. Not just scratch her face but ruin it. More ruthless than Helian Jiaoer. Mother is right, I won't make a fuss. Helian Jiaoer curved her thin lips, the corners of her mouth forming a vicious smile. She knew her mother's methods better than anyone else. If her mother said to ruin that person, there was no possibility of that person rising again. However, this pair of mother and daughter had never thought that, just like what Helian Vivian said, money and power were not enough to cover the sky. There were always many variables in this world, and Helian Vivian's real identity was the cause of many variables. The sky was clear, there were no clouds in sight, the wind blew gently, the emerald green pine and cypress supported the water droplets, the branches swaying. When the branches could no longer bear the weight of the water droplets, only then did they slightly press down on the branches. Snap-do hit her face. At this time, Wei Wei had already changed her makeup and wore White Academy's uniform. She looked all around, yet didn't find the two people she was looking for. That was strange. Could it be that they were also on vacation? Helian Vivian, who had returned without any success, didn't waste any more time on this. Seeing that no one was around, she simply walked out. Such an entry and exit made everyone's guess even more. Look, she actually came back. Coming back at this time, you must have forgotten something. It seems so. But some guys are really exaggerated. They call her boss the moment they see her. That's enough. It's just those people from the good compound who haven't seen the world and are blindly joining in the fun. Some people probably haven't tasted the feeling of being praised before, so they're doing this on purpose. It's as if they're showing off how powerful they are and how popular they are. Originally, when Wei Wei saw those little brothers that she'd accepted, she wanted to give out 2 of the seat tickets in her hand before stopping. Who knew that before they even started chatting, those young ladies from the big families who'd gathered together to practice martial chi saw her as an eyesore. They wholeheartedly thought that she was fighting for a position and looked down on her. After all, no matter how she thought about it, they were stronger than her. This woman's martial chi was indeed good. But what was the use of that? A bad family background was fatal. Furthermore, she didn't have the slightest bit of martial chi. Those people should be surrounding them. Why were they so blind as to surround a country bumpkin? Helian Vivian understood that this was all caused by jealousy. She crossed her arms and looked at them with an evil smile. The person standing beside her was also a straightforward person. Chen Yifeng, who was from the general's estate, spoke with a reckless spirit. Are you done? You're always chattering. Other than speaking ill of others, what else can you do? Just based on this point, you can't compare to boss. Yes. Your boss is an influential figure. One of them laughed mockingly. After all, there isn't anyone who can't even score a point in the martial chi class. Even the Helian family couldn't help but kick her out of the family tree. Relying on her little martial chi attainments, she thinks that she's invincible. In the end, when the martial chi test came, she revealed her true colors. I don't understand. We're both from the general's estate, but Miss Jiaoer is very kind. Even when she went to Profound Heaven's auction, she didn't make a fuss. If your boss really has the ability, she should also go to the auction and stroll around. Sister, what are you saying? Aren't you making things difficult for our eldest miss? With all of her belongings, it's estimated that she can't buy a seat in the last row of the auction. You shouldn't make things difficult for a poor student. The ladies from the noble families talked back and forth, waving their fans at each other and mocking with fake smiles. You all shut up for me. The more Chen Yifeng listened, the angrier he got. He also studied martial arts. After he lost to Helian Vivian, he was convinced. People like them who studied martial arts, in addition to talent, also paid attention to dexterity. Not everyone could learn martial arts, not to mention how difficult it was to sell those materials. And their boss was the most awesome. Even if ordinary materials in her hands could be turned into a top-notch martial art. These people with eyes at the top of their heads simply didn't know what this meant for the martial arts world. They even ridiculed their boss for not having money. If their boss had money, The martial arts she made would definitely be sold like hotcakes. It can't be, young Master Chan, you want to fight with us for her? Someone sized up Chan Yifeng with a glance. I say, young Master Chan, you shouldn't have some shameful thoughts about your boss, right? For example, you want to marry your boss or something like that. After the words fell, another burst of laughter. Among them, a lady from an aristocratic family laughed until tears came out. She pointed at Chen Yifeng and Hellion Vivian and said, "You don't say, their skin color is actually quite similar. I just don't know if in the future when they give birth to a child it won't be a little black coal ball, right?" Chen Yifeng exploded with a bang. He wanted to rush over and have a good fight. Hellion Vivian pressed down on his wrist. It seemed that she didn't use much strength, but it made Chen Yifeng turn his head in surprise. His eyes flashed with deep astonishment. He knew that although their boss's skill was good, she didn't have a foundation. It was said that when she had just entered the academy, she won that match. Because at that time, Hellion May's performance wasn't very good. Of course, he didn't know what was going on in that match. After all, what the match was really like, only the competitors themselves knew. But at that time in the crystal ball test, their boss clearly didn't even have the ability to ignite the crystal ball. But why did she just lightly put her hand on his arm? He felt a strength he had never felt before. This didn't seem like the strength of a person without martial qi. Chapter 218. Chen Yifeng looked at Hellion Vivian in disbelief. Hellion Vivian just smiled, with 30% evil charm and 70% playfulness. Her eyes met the ridicule of those rich young masters and young ladies. It turns out that the Profound Heavens auction location is so popular. Of course, those people glanced at her arrogantly. Don't tell me you don't know what Profound Heavens is? Come to think of it, a person like you, I'm sure you haven't even seen Profound Heavens before. Chen Yifeng's eyes were red. Our boss really wants to see Profound Heavens armaments. Grandmaster Zizun's armaments are also top-notch. Haha, a country bumpkin is a country bumpkin, really can't communicate. That person held a handkerchief. I say, sisters, let's not waste time here. Let's see if we can buy a seat in the back row through Miss Jiaoer. There's no need to think about the front row. It must have already been booked. These words are true. I heard that the auction won't start until tonight. Let's go ask for leave now and let Miss Jiaoer take us in, how about it? I think it's okay. A group of people laughed and talked, walking together in the direction of the superior compound. Even some of the people who were surrounding Hellion Weiwei just now also awkwardly changed sides at the last minute. This kind of phenomenon actually often appeared in modern times, forming cliques to squeeze people out. It was probably because they looked down on Hellion Vivian from the bottom of their hearts. Like those people said, she didn't have power and influence, so she was doomed to be criticized no matter what she did. But those people probably never thought that they would regret this decision so much in the near future. Hellion Vivian glanced at the people around her. In addition to Chen Yifeng, there were two girls and a boy. Among the two girls, one of them made Hellion Vivian raise her eyebrows. When she looked at her, there was a touch of light in her eyes. This is the childhood sweetheart that Heizei, that guy, didn't dare to confess to? Nalan Hongye saw Hellion Vivian looking at her. She raised her eyes and was very forthright. What's wrong? Are you interested in coming with me? Hellion Weiwei's words were interrogative, but she didn't give the other party the slightest chance to refuse. Her fingers grasped Nalan Hongye's wrist. She had to bring this along. She was the future young madam of the He family, so what if she took Zhang Weizei's world's tickets? In a moment when they arrived at the shop, she would tell manager Zhang to put all the bills on Heizei. The more Hellion Vivian thought about it, the more she felt that it was a good idea. The smile on her face grew wider. Yes, Nalan Hongye had never seen such a woman before. Her smile only made people feel comfortable. She didn't have the subtle gaze that others looked at her. She had always done things like a man, and there were many old men in her family, so she had been raised as a man since she was young. To be honest, she really couldn't understand women. Alright, even though she was also a woman. But for example, when they were eating together, their conversation would always revolve around Hellion Vivian. She didn't want to participate in this kind of conversation. These people gradually alienated her. Bastard, she just wanted to be a beautiful girl who ate quietly. Was it so difficult? Also, those letters written to Heizei, could they always be sent to her? Being sent letters like this by so many girls would affect her marriage in the future. What's more, every time she told Heizei about this kind of thing, Heizei would only give her a cold laugh. He even said that if she sent such letters to the Hei residence again, she should never see him again. Then when she didn't see him, he got angry and said that she had no conscience. He was already locked up, but she didn't know to send him food. Why did she always feel that Heizei was the same as those women? They were all like needles at the bottom of the sea, very difficult to find. One moment he was like this, the next moment he was like that. It really made her very puzzled. Hellion Vivian looked at Nalan Hongye's side face. She didn't think that this girl would leave with her so easily. She thought that the other party would more or less dislike her because of Heizei's actions. She didn't expect that. It was unexpectedly interesting. You're not going to ask me where I'm taking you? Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Nalan Hongye's small face was handsome, expressionless. I'm familiar with Sijou City. I can attest to this point. Chen Yifeng raised his hand at the side. The people she knows are all local tyrants. The armaments they make are also very powerful. It's just that I don't know why she was assigned to the good compound. Nalan Hongye turned her head to look at Chen Yifeng and asked in bewilderment, "How do you know me so well?" Chen Yifeng's face reddened. He lowered his head and didn't say anything. Hellion Vivian, however, understood. Especially when Nalan Hongye had a baby face that everyone loved. Her skin was so tender that it could drip water. She was also not spoiled. This kind of girl, if someone discovered her good points, they would be deeply in love with her. Only, she couldn't help but say that Heizei's move was good. It should be adjusted. Otherwise, if his sweetheart ran away with someone else, let's see how he would continue acting. Heizei didn't let me go to the good compound. He said that seeing me would make him upset. Nalan Hongye's eyes turned. It's probably my temperament that made him lose face. Who told me to not know how to judge people? Hellion Weiwei paused. Her beautiful phoenix-shaped eyes looked up. She discovered that this girl wasn't as clueless as she appeared on the surface. She understood everything, so much so that she could see more clearly than anyone else. She just didn't want to participate. You can come to our inferior compound to play. I'm usually bored by myself. Hellion Weiwei walked forward while chuckling as she looked at the girl in her hand. Apart from attending classes seriously, there's no other entertainment. Chen Yifeng. Nalan Hongye. Attending classes seriously, was it really appropriate for someone who slept all day to the point that even the teacher wanted to remove her name from the class? Right, boss, where are we going? Nalan Hongye didn't want to know. But they also wanted to know. After all, asking for leave was too extravagant for them. Hellion Vivian smiled faintly and said lightly, "We're also going to Profound Heavens." Another 2 hours passed. After the sunset, the show began. The streets were bustling with people coming and going, and there was an endless stream of horses and carriages. There were people who made sugar figures, sold rouge and powder, and fortune-telling people. The capital was originally the most prosperous capital of the Dragon War Empire. It was densely populated and luxurious. Now the streets of Chang'an were even more crowded. Probably the most luxurious carriages in the capital were gathered in front of Profound Heavens, waiting to enter. Inside, there were also quite a few people wearing White Academy's uniform. From a distance, no matter how one looked at it, there were at least 6 or 7 people. There were both men and women surrounding Hellion Jiao'er's side, chatting and laughing, hoping that Hellion Jiao'er would lead them inside. Hellion Jiao'er couldn't not see their thoughts, but spending some money was nothing to her. What's more, these people's fathers were also useful in the imperial court, so Hellion Jiao'er didn't refuse at all. She was generous as if Profound Heavens was her family's. Chapter 219. Boss, are we really going there? Chen Yifeng looked at the sea of people in the distance and was somewhat hesitant. It was not that he couldn't take out the money, but he was worried that someone would say something bad to attack his boss. Moreover, he heard that the seats in the Profound Heaven auction house were very popular. Some time ago, even his old man said that he would find a way to get one for him. He felt that his boss was powerful enough, there was no need to look at other people. Although the armaments of Profound Heaven were indeed good, but there was a suspicion of deliberately creating momentum. However, the boss of Profound Heaven was the first person in many years to create such momentum. He also heard the old man say something about brand effect. He didn't even understand what they were saying, but he knew that the other party was very powerful. Profound Heavens was the first person who could make the entire War Dragon Empire's people feel itchy, making people feel that having a martial art was equivalent to having a unique identity. That's why everyone fought to enter. Aside from the martial cultivators themselves, what they wanted was to display their nobility at this kind of time. If their boss went, wouldn't she be ridiculed by those people? The clever Hellion Vivian of course saw Chun Yifeng's worry. She hooked her lips and smiled. Don't worry, Profound Heaven is not as difficult to enter as you think. Chun Yifeng grabbed his hair and couldn't express the helplessness in his heart. Boss, this matter is not as simple as you think. But what he didn't expect was that there were people who agreed with such a statement. Well, it's really not that difficult to enter. Nalan Hongya thought about it, then reached out and took out the silver card on her body. Her voice was faint. Actually, I have 2 positions here. Hellion Vivian didn't need to think to know where her silver card came from. Someone couldn't help but make a move tomorrow. Heize really hit it deep. Silver card. Chun Yifeng looked a little dizzy. You actually have a silver card of Profound Heaven? When did Nalan family have such a big power? Even the Defense Department didn't get a silver card. Nalan Hongya asked with a serious face. Is it difficult to have this? Heize gave me 5 at once. But she only took 1 out. No, it's not difficult at all. Hellion Vivian smiled faintly. However, it was a little too light of a punishment for someone who couldn't distinguish between public and private matters. She seemed to have thought of something and the corners of her lips curled up. Easy, do you mind if we switch positions later? Nalan Hongya was very straightforward. I don't mind. Anyway, He Xiaozi has been locked up by the old man recently. He probably can't come out even if he wants to. Heh, in order to be able to watch an armament test alone with you, even if he had to crawl into a dog's kennel, he would still crawl out. However, Hellion Vivian smiled evilly. Disobedient employees always needed to be knocked and pinched, so that they would not often go crazy in the future and get close to her from time to time. Don't think that she's a fool. Just because she doesn't say it doesn't mean that she doesn't know. In the past, Heize had wanted to make use of her and get close to her. It was probably because he had just entered the academy at that time, and didn't understand the various rules of the academy. In addition, there were too many girls in the academy, so it was inevitable that jealousy would arise from admiration. She reckoned that Heize also wanted to find someone to divert these people's attention. Coincidentally or not, she became that gun handle. For example, that Chun Wenwan, because she obviously liked Heize, she came to frame her. That's why it's said that a blue face is more deadly than a femme fatale. It was because of this that Heize deliberately distanced himself from Nalan Hongya, and turned around to get close to her. Hellion Vivian had long seen through this layer, but didn't say anything. Firstly, it was because she felt that the feelings of childhood sweethearts were more precious. Although she didn't really approve of Heize's method, she couldn't deny that to some extent, it could indeed protect another person. Of course, she wasn't Mother Mary, sacrificing herself in order to protect someone. The main reason was that she was already standing on the cusp of the storm, so she didn't care if there was one more. Arguing with Heize about this wasn't enough time to waste. Secondly, Heize treated her pretty well. She wasn't an ungrateful person. Having this brother, she naturally stood on the same line. But occasionally giving him a small punishment to let him know how powerful she was also necessary. Moreover, she really wanted to see what that playboy young Master He, who had never put anyone in his eyes, would look like when he was jealous. Nalan Hongya didn't know what Hellion Vivian was thinking. Chun Yifeng and the other 2 students didn't even catch their breath, and didn't even follow up with the conversation. It was obviously very difficult to get those silver cards, okay? Nalan Hongya even got 5 at once? That was practically better treatment than the royal family. Why does young Master He have so many silver cards? Chun Yifeng was impulsive and rash, but his brain wasn't stupid. Could it be that he has some kind of relationship with Profound Heaven's boss? Hellion Vivian glanced at him indifferently, smiling faintly. You can ask Heize this question when you have the chance. It's almost time, let's go first. Chun Yifeng was still a bit dizzy. his head swelling as he followed Hellion Vivian and the rest into the crowd. Look who's here. Why is she here? Don't tell me that these people also came to the auction to watch the auction. The few students who had previously ridiculed Hellion Wei Wei and the others in the academy looked at them with amused eyes, especially when they looked at Hellion Wei Wei. Disdain was clearly written on their faces. Hellion Jiaoer also saw Hellion Vivian and the rest of the group. She frowned. Big sister. What is this bitch doing here? Big sister? When the surrounding madams heard Hellion Jiaoer's address, they all turned to look at Hellion Wei Wei's direction. They only saw a young girl with a dark face standing there. The clothes on her body were also made of the most common materials. Looking left and right, there wasn't a single piece that was presentable. Sister Sue, this is your adopted eldest daughter. It's really better to see her than to hear about her 100 times. Look at her he. It had to be said that he was an all-encompassing word, not only in modern times but also in ancient times. Everyone knew that Su Yanmo looked down on Hellion Vivian from the bottom of her heart. After all, the Hellion family was a famous beauty in the entire Dragon War Empire. There was even a rumor that she would marry the neighboring country's emperor. But no one knew what happened, and in the end, Hellion Guangyao became the son-in-law of the Hellion family. At that time no one knew who the Su family was. If the Hellion family hadn't changed hands, Su Yanmo probably wouldn't have been able to match up to the Hellion family. Chapter 220. However, sometimes it was not good for a woman to be too capable. No matter how powerful the Hellion family was in the end, she was still unable to protect herself in her old age. Her husband was snatched away, and the family property was taken away. Now, the one who called the shots was not the one from the Hellion family, but Su Yanmo. Compared to that one, they preferred Su Yanmo. She was a stubborn person, and always looked like a flower on a high mountain. She thought that she was great because she had fought a few battles, but when she returned to the capital, her reputation was still ruined by them. If they were to say she was a stupid girl. Now, looking at her daughter's way of doing things, it was not much better. If she did not have any talents, she should just stay at home and not come out. She did not even see what kind of occasion it was today, and she still rushed to the front. The point was, did she think she could do it? Some of the ladies looked at Hellion Vivian arrogantly, as if they were looking at a clown. They thought that since they had not entered the scene yet, they might as well have some fun. I say, Wei Wei, your name is Wei Wei, right? How's your marriage going? Do you need us to introduce someone to you, so that your mother won't have to worry about you? Before Hellion Vivian could say anything, Su Yanmo interrupted. It would be great if there is a suitable one. If this child does not have a husband for the rest of her life, I don't know how much my sister will hate me in the afterlife. Little sister Sue, you're just too kind. Don't worry, I happen to have a pretty good one here. He just came back from the battlefield, but his legs are a little inconvenient. But Wei Wei, you should also understand that at your age, plus the previous incident, it's already good enough that someone can marry you back home. After saying that, that person sighed. Of course, it would also depend on whether the other side is willing to accept you. After all, you have no talents and no looks. It would be hard for me to explain to them. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. She was smiling from beginning to end, but that smile did not reach her eyes. That's too scary. Someone actually dares to introduce men to you. Yuan Ming rubbed his arms. Aren't they afraid that you'll beat the other party until half of their body is paralyzed? Moreover, with a missing leg, they probably won't even be able to do that. Woman, it seems that some people think that you're worthless and want to deal with you cheaply. Chen Yifeng's family had a general before, so he had heard a little about this person who had just returned from the battlefield. When he heard the madam's words, he frowned. Isn't that person already in his 50s? You want our boss to marry an old man in his 50s? What a rotten old man. That's a general with outstanding military service. The madam didn't like Chen Yifeng either. She glanced at Hellion Vivian and said, Wei Wei, it's not that I want to criticize you, but you're an unmarried girl. How can you hang around with men all day long? How can you be so rude to me? I'm your elder. Hellion Vivian laughed. She picked her ears with her fingers and said, I was wondering why the sound was so harsh to my ears. It turns out that it's because people have been barking non-stop. Also, Auntie, who are you? Am I close to you? You came up and said that you want to introduce a husband to me. Do you think you're so important? You. The madam was so angry that she kept hitting her own chest with her handkerchief. I've never seen such an ungrateful girl. Madame Su pretended to be red in the face. Sister, calm down. It's Wei Wei who doesn't know the rules and doesn't understand our good intentions. All these years I've been scratching my head. Think about it, sister. You should know that it's not that I, Su Yanemo, don't not care. It's just that I can't control her. As she said this, she let out a long sigh and looked like she was about to cry from being wronged. When the people around them heard these words, they started to point at Hellion Wei Wei one after another. When Madame Su saw this, she felt relieved. Thinking about the humiliation she had suffered in the hidden spirit temple this time, she had never suffered before. Now she could finally vent her disgust. What she wanted to see was to let this little bastard be condemned by everyone. Other than revenge, of course, Madame Su had other plans. The auction was about to start. She received news that the retired emperor would be coming. Last time she heard from Zhao Heir that this little bastard used them to curry favor with the retired emperor. That was why the retired emperor was so angry. Calculating the time, the retired emperor should be arriving by now. He was most likely sitting in the tea house opposite. The environment there was good and the view was good. If it wasn't for the high officials and nobles of the capital, it was impossible to book a seat there on this day. Su Yanmo's guess was right. There was indeed someone sitting in the tea house. The retired emperor, dressed in a Chinese brocade robe, sat in the most important seat. He held a purple jade teacup in his hand. Between his eyebrows, there were traces of power left behind by years of mingling in a high position. Although his eyebrows were smiling, it gave people a sense of oppression without being angry. On his left and right sat 4 men. All of them were handsome and had extraordinary manners. Of course, the most outstanding one was the third prince, dressed in a white robe and purple muslin. Beligaju. His elbows casually rested on the carved wooden chair, and his slender white fingers lazily propped up the side of his face. His finely crafted white robe fluttered in the wind, and his ink-black hair fluttered, revealing his handsome face that was both good and evil. The light of the setting sun faintly shone on his body through the wooden window, outlining his perfect figure in varying shades of light. Sitting opposite him was the heir of the Murong Palace, Murong Changfeng. Compared to Bailey Jiaju's coldness and indifference, his eyes were filled with appropriate gentleness, not too much, not too little, and not too much. He wore a brocade cloak with a navy blue cloud-embroidered robe. His eyes watched the scene below and he sneered. Now that woman should know how difficult it was for her to marry someone other than him. Although he didn't like to see anyone treat her like this, it was more important than anything that there was someone who could let her see this clearly. Eunuch's son, who was standing beside him, was not as magnanimous as Murong Changfeng. Ever since he heard the words below, he wanted to go out and stop it, but the retired emperor had an attitude of wanting to listen. Therefore, no matter how anxious Eunuch's son was, he could only stand to the side and look at his master's faint smile. He thought of His Highness's face, but he was still wearing a mask. If he took off the mask, who knew how cold it would be? In this way, someone was going to be unlucky, regardless of what Hellion Vivian meant to His Highness. But in front of His Highness, she was so brazenly introducing her husband to His Highness's favorite princess.